Chapter 281, Punishment, Monday Morning. The living Moody the old Auror had talked about had once again reverted to the model student Lynn, the same Lynn that certain people, or rather one particular someone, liked to call a paragon of virtue. Since he and his roommates had no morning classes, he was in his room, holding the wand that had been snapped in two and carefully applying some sort of gelatinous substance to the break. By the time he finished the repairs and stepped out, he found Edgar sitting cross-legged on his bed, chewing buttered bread and chattering excitedly to William. Lynn set the repaired wand in the corner and asked casually, "What are you two so worked up about?" The instant Edgar saw him, his eyes lit up and he bounced off the bed to meet him. "Lynn, guess what shocking gossip I just heard?" Lynn raised an eyebrow. "What?" "This morning, Moody was taken away during the Gryffindor Defense Against the Dark Arts class." Lynn's smile froze. "Taken away? By whom?" "By Aurors from the Ministry." Edgar waved his hand so much he sent crumbs flying. "A bunch of them stormed into the classroom and hauled him out. They said he's a suspect in a terrorist attack and must be investigated. Dumbledore went with them." "A terrorist attack?" Lynn blurted before he could stop himself. "Wasn't it an act of bravery?" The dormitory fell silent. Edgar's hand froze mid-gesture, his mouth half open. William set his book down and pushed his glasses up, staring at Lynn. Even the usually quiet Ollie glanced over, 3 pairs of eyes fixed on him at once. Edgar's face lit up. "My father thinks so too. He says if Moody hadn't been there, more people would have died. Wait, you know what happened?" Before Lynn could answer, Ollie spoke quietly. "He is the real Moody." Edgar went pale. "What? You went to the ministry yesterday? That Moody was you? One of the 2 Moodies was you?" Before Lynn could deny it, a flash of fire erupted in the center of the room. Gold-red flames blossomed out of thin air, and a blinding light filled the dormitory. When the brilliance faded, Fawkes stood there, cocking his head and scanning the room. Without another sound, the phoenix landed on Lynn's shoulder. Lynn met Fawkes's gaze, then looked at his 3 roommates, who were frozen in various stages of disbelief. I'm going to the headmaster's office first," Lynn said, patting Fawkes's wing. Flames flared again, and when the light vanished, Lynn and Fawkes were gone. Only 3 stunned boys remained. Edgar finally managed in a shaky voice, "So, Lynn went to the ministry yesterday to carry out a terrorist attack?" "Headmaster's office." The portraits along the walls were unusually quiet. Not a single one dozed or chatted, all of them watching the 2 figures before the desk with intent interest. Albus Dumbledore sat behind the great table, his silvery beard glowing in the firelight, but his face was uncommonly serious. His eyes were fixed unwaveringly on Lynn. The attention made Lynn uneasy. He scratched his cheek and offered a sheepish, "Good morning, headmaster." Dumbledore didn't reply, only continued to study him. Lynn tried another tack. "Lovely weather today." Still no response. He cleared his throat. "Fine," he sighed. "Say what you need to say. I'm listening." Dumbledore finally spoke, slow and unreadable. "I'm afraid I must ask you about yesterday. Could you tell me what you were doing?" Lynn blinked. The question was deliberately phrased. He decided honesty was the best policy. Dumbledore probably already knew most of it. "I was performing a courageous act." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then the old headmaster, unable to contain it, laughed, a deep, incredulous sound. "A courageous act at Barty Crouch's funeral?" Lynn nodded vigorously. "You are perceptive, headmaster." Dumbledore smiled faintly and shook his head. "I guessed. It seemed something you would do." Lynn's defenses sagged. "So, how will you punish me? Expulsion, detention, Azkaban?" Dumbledore's expression didn't change. He lifted his teacup, sipped, set it down, and sipped again. Lynn waited. Finally, Dumbledore looked up. "The Ministry has already discussed the matter. Professor Moody's intervention has been recognized as an act of bravery. In time, he will likely be awarded an Order of Merlin." The corners of his mouth twitched. "So you needn't worry about expulsion, detention, or Azkaban." Relief flooded Lynn. "Then can I go back now?" Dumbledore's gaze remained steady. "However, regarding your impersonation of Professor Moody, you must be reprimanded." Lynn's mood fell. "What punishment?" "You must explain the situation to Professor Moody yourself," Dumbledore said. Lynn blinked. "Apologize to Moody. Really? That was the punishment?" He brightened a little. "Fine, no problem. I'll go right away." He started toward the door. And one more thing, Dumbledore called softly. Lynn paused and turned. Dumbledore's face was calm, but amusement danced in his eyes. Fishing will be banned. Lynn looked baffled. What? Until the end of term, fishing at Hogwarts is prohibited. Lynn's eyes widened. Headmaster, this is your punishment, Dumbledore interrupted gently. You have accepted it. Lynn sank inward. A fishing ban until the end of term, that was more than 2 months. His expression soured. Isn't that a bit harsh? I didn't commit a major crime. I acted bravely and only borrowed Professor Moody's identity. No serious consequences resulted, and the Ministry called my actions brave. Dumbledore raised his teacup and took another slow sip. Then why? You may go, Dumbledore said, setting the cup down and giving a slight wave. Remember to apologize to Professor Moody. Lynn stood for a few seconds, staring at the headmaster's calm, kindly gaze. He took a deep breath and turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Headmaster, about the fishing ban. Could it be reduced? 1 month? Dumbledore shook his head. Lynn's shoulders drooped further. Half a month? Again a shake of the headmaster's head. Resigned, Lynn sighed and pushed open the door. Mr. Lynn? He turned back. Dumbledore's smile was gentle. Next time you impersonate an Auror, it won't be as simple as a fishing ban. Lynn managed a nervous laugh. I won't. There won't be a next time. He slipped out and closed the door behind him. Inside the office, the headmaster lifted his teacup once more. From the portrait on the wall, Phineas Nigellus's voice piped up. Albus, you're sending him to apologize to Moody? Are you sure Moody won't use the unforgivable on him on the spot? Dumbledore shook his head. Moody is not that sort of man. Chapter 282, Dumbledore is still here. As everyone knows in the wizarding world, whenever a piece of hot news dies down, another one rushes in to take its place. It was the same pattern now, calm on the surface like the Black Lake, but with currents surging beneath. So it was no surprise when famous reporter Rita Skeeter ran another explosive piece in the Daily Prophet. The headline was as sensational as ever. Shocking! Death Eater, Barty Crouch, escaped Azkaban 13 years ago. You know who is about to return. The article landed like a depth charge. Owls nearly broke their wings delivering the paper. By noon, the story was everywhere. Street corners, pubs, tea shops, and the corridors of the Ministry. Did you see it? People asked one another. I did. Barty Crouch still alive? I thought he died in Azkaban 13 years ago. The paper says he disguised himself, was posing as Moody. Moody? Mad-Eye Moody? Yes, at the funeral there were 2 Moodys fighting, and one of them turned out to be him. Merlin, is you-know-who really back? I don't know, but the paper says a dozen Death Eaters shouted, "Long live the Dark Lord," that day. Rumors spread like wildfire, and fear followed. If you asked what people feared most in Britain, you-know-who topped the list. The damage he had done, broken families, brutal deaths, nights lived in terror, was too recent to forget. Even now, most people refused to say his name aloud. One mention was enough to send a chill through the room. So Rita's article set the whole country alight. At the Ministry of Magic, Cornelius Fudge slammed the newspaper down on his desk. Rita Skeeter, he hissed through clenched teeth, fat jowls trembling. She had accused him of incompetence before, and now she was claiming you-know-who might be returning. If the public believed it, how could he keep his office? Fudge paced, sweat beading on his forehead. He had to quash the rumors, immediately. But how? The facts were awkward. Crouch had escaped, someone had been impersonating Moody, and a group of Death Eaters had shouted in the Great Hall, facts that could not be denied outright. He stood staring out the window, thinking, then turned, took up a quill, and summoned the press. Emergency press conference, 3 o'clock, Ministry Press Conference Hall. At 3, the hall was packed. Dozens of reporters crowded the long table, quick quotes quills scribbling, flashbulbs popping, all eyes fixed on the figure standing at the rostrum. Fudge took his place behind the podium, his expression grave. He cleared his throat until the room quieted, then spoke in a low, weary voice. Everyone, I know why you are here, he began. Regarding the unfortunate events at Mr. Barty Crouch's funeral and Miss Rita Skeeter's article today, the Ministry has a responsibility to clarify the facts. He looked over the room. First, yes, Barty Crouch did escape from Azkaban. A hum of astonishment rose, and Fudge raised a hand for silence. But this has nothing to do with the return of you-know-who. He opened a scrap of parchment and read aloud. Barty Crouch Sr., the former ministry official we recently mourned, did something desperate in the final moments of his life. Using methods still under investigation, he smuggled his son, Barty Crouch Jr., who had been sentenced to life in Azkaban, out of the prison, hid him in his home, and kept him under the Imperious Curse for a period of time. Reporters reacted, quills racing. Fudge continued, "The reason Barty Crouch Jr. appeared at the funeral is that the Imperious weakened when his father died, and he regained consciousness. The reason he posed as Professor Moody is obvious. Moody is a legendary Auror, and Barty hated him. He wanted revenge and to ruin Moody's reputation. And those Death Eaters who shouted, 'Long live the Dark Lord,'" Fudge went on. "That was not a sign of you-know-who's return. It was a terrorist action by a group of dark wizards trying to destabilize the ministry, deliberately timed to the funeral to create panic and make it seem as though you-know-who had returned." He sighed. "I know what you're thinking. Could he really be back? Are we heading back to those dark times?" "No." He straightened, voice firm. "The Ministry has captured all the dark wizards involved in the attack. They are being interrogated. Azkaban's defenses have been fully upgraded. What happened with Barty Sr. will not happen again. As for you-know-who, I can tell you responsibly that there is no evidence of his return. These rumors were fabricated to frighten you. We have Professor Dumbledore, we have the finest Aurors, and we have the full power of the Ministry to ensure your safety. Please, report truthfully. Do not spread rumors with ulterior motives." He folded the parchment and bowed slightly. "Thank you." Fudge's explanation worked, partly because he was persuasive, and partly because people desperately wanted to believe him. A father's love saving his son made a plausible motive. The Imperious weakening with the caster's death explained Barty Jr.'s return to consciousness. The Death Eaters could be written off as a small band of troublemakers exploiting a funeral. The next day's Daily Prophet ran Fudge's image on the front page with the headline, "Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge issues emergency clarification. You-know-who has not returned. Public need not panic." Rita Skeeter's follow-up was pushed to a corner. Far away at Hogwarts, the news also stirred conversation. Owls had delivered the papers to the castle, and the Great Hall rustled with turning pages, but the students' focus was very different from the Ministry's. "Do you think you-know-who is really back?" a Gryffindor student asked timidly. The boy next to him rolled his eyes. "Dumbledore's still here. What is there to fear? As long as Dumbledore's around, Voldemort's a joke," another chimed in. "Besides, even if he were back, we still have Professor Moody. He's spent his life catching dark wizards." At those words, the table fell silent, then the conversation shifted. "Speaking of Professor Moody, two Moodys fighting." "Yes, that's the point." Compared to the abstract terror of you-know-who, the students were far more interested in the immediate gossip. Two Moodys fighting in the Ministry's Great Hall, one hurling fiendfire, the other casting Avada Kedavra, a world-shaking duel that ended with one of them dead and the corpse reverting to Barty Crouch Jr. The story was thrilling and vivid. Voldemort felt distant and unreal. After all, Dumbledore is still here. So what was there to be afraid of? Chapter 283. Do you have a problem with me? With the arrival of April, the Easter holidays finally began. The sunlight grew warmer by the day. Tender green buds were sprouting at the tops of the trees in the Forbidden Forest. The ice on the Black Lake had long since gone, and now and then a fish would leap from its glittering surface and send up a splash. It should have been a wonderful break. For the students of Hogwarts, it was an unprecedented nightmare. Because of homework. There was an appalling amount of it. The professors seemed to have conspired to bury the students in assignments, keeping them chained to the library and barely allowing time for anything else. On Monday morning in Transfiguration, Professor McGonagall stood at the lectern with a roll of parchment in her hand, her face gravely solemn as if she were announcing a national emergency. "Easter holiday homework," she said, eyes sweeping over the students whose faces were already tightening. A 27-inch essay titled, "On the Ethical Boundaries and Spell Control of Human Transfiguration." In addition, you are required to read 7 designated books, including Advanced Transfiguration Theory, the history and case studies of human transfiguration, Gulpalot's Law of Transfiguration. She continued down the list, then added, and write another 7-inch essay. With each item she announced, the groans grew louder. By the time she finished the 7th title, the classroom had erupted. 27 inches? 7 books? Are they trying to kill us? Professor McGonagall swept her gaze over them and raised her voice 2 notches. Silence. The room fell silent instantly. She went on, "You will soon be in your 5th year and facing your OOLs. This is to help you adjust in advance to the intensity of next year's studies." She said it as if that ended the matter, then turned and left. In the Hufflepuff common room, Edgar slumped on the sofa, staring up at the ceiling, a sheet of parchment trailing from his hand onto the floor, not a single line written. 27 inches, he muttered. 7 books. I can't even manage 3 inches. William sat in an armchair nearby, 3 books open in front of him, quill scratching, his expression resolute. Edgar glanced up at him, despair in his eyes. "William, how can you still write?" William didn't look away from his work. "Because I want to graduate." Edgar was quiet for a beat. "I want to graduate too, but I also want to keep my life." Ollie sat by the window with a book open as well, turning pages slowly, pausing to jot a few words on his parchment now and then. Edgar looked from him to William, and then down at his own blank page and sighed. Maybe I should repeat a year. While most of the students were fretting, there was one group whose situation made the rest grind their teeth in envy: the champions. The professors hadn't entirely waived their homework for the champions, but had cut it down by more than half. 27 inches became 10, and 7 books were reduced to 3. Fewer all-nighters, at least. When Edgar heard that, he leaped up and stormed over to Cedric, grief and indignation on his face. "On what grounds? Why do you get less work?" Cedric scratched his head sheepishly. Maybe because we still have to prepare for the tournament?" Edgar. He couldn't argue with that. It made sense. But one champion's treatment was wildly different from the others. Lynn. His homework had been doubled. That's right, doubled. 27 inches became 54, and 7 books became 14. When Lynn received his list from Professor McGonagall, he stared at it in stunned disbelief, checked it 3 times, then looked up. "Professor, is there a mistake?" McGonagall's face was calm. "There is no mistake, but the other champions had theirs reduced. You are special." He seriously suspected Dumbledore had a problem with him, some personal vendetta, because why else would everyone else get less while he got more? He decided to demand an explanation. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore sat behind his desk with a cup of tea and a gentle smile. Lynn stood before him, trying to keep his face steady. "Headmaster, I have a question. Please, speak. Why has my homework been doubled?" Dumbledore blinked. "Doubled? Has it?" Lynn took a breath. "Professor McGonagall said so herself." Dumbledore thought for a moment. "Oh, right, I suggested it." Lynn, he almost choked. "Why?" Dumbledore sipped his tea. "Because your performance at the ministry last time showed you still have a great deal of untapped potential. More homework will help you develop it." Lynn stared at him. Dumbledore smiled fondly, a smile that carried a hint of something deeper. "How could I possibly have a problem with you?" he said. "Lynn," that was his answer. "Then my homework." "Write it," Dumbledore said, setting down his cup. His tone was gentle but firm. Lynn took another breath and nodded. "Fine." He left the office, mentally composing his revenge. "Old Bumblebee. Just wait. I'll take everything you love. Like Louis XVI in his head, no one will save you." Of course, the workload didn't stump Lynn. He went back to the common room, and rather than sulk over books like everyone else, sat down at an empty table and pulled out his parchments and quill. Then he took out his phone. Dialing. "Beep? Hello?" Fred's voice answered. "Who's this?" "It's me," Lynn said. "Are you free?" "Yeah. What's up?" "I've got a job. Interested?" There was a pause. Then Fred's voice dropped with a spark of excitement. "What kind of job?" "Help me with my homework." "What?" Lynn told him exactly how much. 54 inches and 14 books. Silence on the other end. Then George leaned closer to the receiver. 54 inches? 14 books? Yes. Are you serious? When have I ever joked? Another pause. Finally, Fred's tone shifted to business. "This job, the pay needs to be increased." Lynn smiled. Money he had. "Fine. 1 bag of galleons each, half up front, half on completion." "Deal." That evening, the Weasley twins slipped into the Hufflepuff common room and sat facing Lynn, several thick reference books spread out before them, quills ready. They looked surprisingly serious. "Let's get to work," George declared. Then, scratch, 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 the quills flew across the parchments. Each twin took half the essay and coordinated with astonishing efficiency. They argued quietly over phrasing and where to expand an argument, trading citations and examples. Lynn lounged nearby, legs crossed, sipping tea and offering occasional pointers. "This section needs more depth. Rework it. That citation is wrong. It should be page 127 of the third volume. Add an example here to make it more persuasive." The twins rolled their eyes as they wrote, but their hands didn't stop. After all, one bag of galleons could buy a very respectable supply of joke shop supplies. By midnight, they had finished half of the 54-inch essay. The twins slumped back, hands trembling. Lynn checked what they'd written and nodded with quiet satisfaction. Not bad. He pulled 2 bags of galleons from his pocket and tossed them over. "The rest when it's done." The twins weighed the bags and smiled in satisfaction. "Lynn," Fred said with feeling, "you really are a good person." Lynn smiled back. "Likewise." After they left, Lynn put the parchments away and went up to his dormitory to lie on his bed, staring at the ceiling, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. "Dumbledore, oh Dumbledore. You thought doubling my homework would stop me? You've underestimated me. Chapter 284. Can you go a little easier on me?" After 3 days and 3 long nights, the Weasley twins delivered exactly what Lynn had asked for, a neat stack of essays that satisfied even his exacting standards. The pile of parchment was nearly half a person tall, every page written in tidy script, arguments clearly laid out, citations and page numbers meticulously noted. Lynn flipped through them and nodded. Not bad. He pulled 2 coin pouches of galleons from his pocket and tossed them to the twins. Final payment. Fred caught the pouch, weighed it, and his eyes lit up. "This much?" Lynn fished out 2 smaller pouches and tossed those over too. "Extra. For your trouble." George opened his and gasped. He looked up at Lynn, eyes suddenly wet. "Lynn? Are you St. Nicholas reincarnated?" Fred nodded enthusiastically. Right. You're practically another parent to us." Lynn waved them off. All right. Stop being dramatic and get out of my hair." Clutching their money, the twins left, showering him with gratitude. At the doorway, Fred turned back, solemn. "Lynn, if you ever need this sort of work again, call us anytime." "Yeah," George chimed in. "We're at your service." Lynn smiled and waved. When the door closed behind them, he looked down at the stack of essays and felt the faint curl of satisfaction at his lips. Worth every galleon. A few days later, in the Hufflepuff dormitory, sunlight spilled through the window and warmed a patch of floor. Lynn lounged in an armchair by the glass, a niffler curled contentedly in his lap. He stroked the creature now and then. It purred and kicked its small paws in bliss. Lynn's expression was the picture of ease. Near the desk, Edgar sat surrounded by 7 or 8 heavy textbooks and a towering pile of homework parchments. A quill hung limply from his fingers, but no words flowed onto the page. He kept glancing from Lynn to the mountain of assignments and clicking his tongue. Sigh. Lynn ignored him. Sigh. Lynn still ignored him. See. That one was long and melodramatic. William, buried in an essay of his own, finally had enough. Without looking, he grabbed the nearest book and, with unerring aim, chucked it. Ouch! Edgar clutched the back of his head, sprang up, and glared. What was that for? William pushed his glasses up, perfectly calm. Finished your homework? All you've been doing is sighing. Edgar's face fell. He pointed mournfully at the pile in front of him. There's too much. How are we supposed to finish all of this? I swear whoever made these assignments didn't mean for us to get through them. He got more worked up the more he talked, waving his arms and spitting his words. And look at this one Mad Eye gave us. He expects us to be able to dodge the spells he fires at us when term starts. That's impossible. That's Mad Eye. We've all heard how he used to hunt dark wizards his whole life. How am I supposed to dodge his spells? William opened his mouth to argue and then closed it. The assignment really did seem impossible. So what are you going to do? Edgar slid back into his chair and stared at the ceiling. I don't know. I guess wait for death? A crisp snap cut through the dormitory. Ollie put down his quill. The sound was quiet, but very sharp. Edgar and William both looked over at him. Ollie's face was expressionless as he said one word, practice. Edgar blinked. Practice? How? With who? He stopped mid-sentence, mentally slapping himself. He turned his head slowly. Lynn had set the niffler down and was standing up, smiling at them. That smile, bright, harmless, almost warm. But in Edgar's mind, it felt as ominous as seeing you-know-who. He swallowed hard. William and Ollie swallowed too. They were in the practice ground, a grassy area under a simulated sky where the light was soft and even. Lynn and the three boys stood at the corners of a square. The rules are simple, Lynn said. I attack, you three defend. Whoever gets hit has to do an extra hour of practice. We keep going until you can dodge. Edgar's face dropped. Why do you get to attack and we have to defend? William pushed his glasses up and protested. That's unfair. That's one-sided. Ollie said nothing but nodded emphatically. Lynn blinked. Then how do you want to practice? The three glanced at each other and said together, free for all. Are you sure? Positive. Edgar puffed up with righteous confidence. 3 against 1. That's better. William added, that way we can practice both attacking and dodging. Ollie kept nodding. Lynn's smile deepened. Fine. Have it your way. He stepped back and planted himself in the center. Very well. Free for all. The three boys spread out and took positions around him. Edgar gripped his wand, eyes fixed, calculating. With 3 of them, surely they could corner him. Dudu stood at the edge of the field and raised a hand. 3, 2, 1. Start. On the count, 3 spells streaked toward Lynn from different directions at once. Edgar's Stupefy, William's Expelliarmus, and Ollie's Binding spell. Their timing was clean, the angles meant to cut off any escape. Lynn barely moved. The first spell skimmed his shoulder. The second passed under his arm. For the third, he simply flicked his wand. The binding spell glanced off as if it had hit an invisible surface and flew off harmlessly. Edgar's eyes widened. What kind of reaction time is that? Lynn just smiled, and then he moved. He darted across the field in a dizzying blur, zigzagging and pacing in a way that made following him with the eye nearly impossible. The three boys fired again and again, but not a single spell touched him. Edgar grew frantic. He chattered teeth and started firing Stupefy after Stupefy, trying to pepper Lynn into a sieve. It made no difference. Lynn seemed to anticipate every cast and slipped away with impossible angles. Don't just dodge if you've got the guts, Edgar shouted. Lynn paused. Some people provoked him. You asked for it. Before anyone could react, a thick fog rolled out over the field. The mist rose without warning until no one could see their own hands. Edgar gripped his wand, ears straining for sound. He was sure Lynn would come for him first. A faint glimmer to his front left blinked through the fog. A spell's flash. Edgar dove instinctively to the right and tripped. A small step had been conjured into being at ground level, just high enough to make him stumble. He pitched forward and landed face first. When he scrambled up, his wand was gone. Lynn's voice floated through the mist, amused. Falling for such a simple feint. You're not cut out for this, are you? Edgar clutched his knee and glared. You cheated. Another voice spoke right beside him. Who talks about rules on a battlefield? Edgar opened his mouth to argue and then stopped. Dead men don't talk. Before he could think, the mist thinned as Ollie, frantic, swept his wand and a gust of wind tore through the fog. Clarity returned instantly. Lynn was already on him. He'd grabbed Edgar by the collar, hauled him to his feet, and shoved him forward, turning him into a human shield facing Ollie. Lynn, you! Ollie didn't hesitate. He fired a knockback jinx aimed at Lynn, really aimed at Edgar. Lynn reacted instantly. He slashed his wand, and a translucent shield charm blossomed around him, and Edgar, a faint silver barrier that shimmered in the light. The knockback jinx detonated into a blinding ball of light 1/2 meter from the shield. Ollie instinctively shut his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw Edgar hurtling toward him, arms flailing, mouth open in a high-pitched scream. They collided. Edgar smashed into Ollie, and Ollie was knocked backward. The two tumbled, rolled, and finally came to a stop in a tangled heap, limbs flailed and dignity scattered. Ouch, both of them said. William stood frozen for a long moment, looking at the two collapsed figures, then at Lynn, who was calmly dusting his hands. Finally, he managed to croak. Can you go a little easier? Lynn pretended to consider it, then shook his head. No. William continued. Didn't you go easy on him just now? How long has he been training? How could he possibly improve that much so fast? Ollie drifted over, expressionless, playing the fool. Edgar's wand lowered as he turned his head slowly to glare at Lynn. The look was as dark as it could be. Lynn gave a sheepish chuckle. Well, there actually is progress, Edgar glared. Lynn sighed. Fine, we'll change the method. A few days later, the Death Eaters are attacking. Run! Run! Upper year students calmly hauled him to his feet. What's the panic? It's fake. Fake! Yeah, fake. It doesn't do anything if it hits you. The freshman stared, stunned, watching the two older boys continue their fierce exchange of green light. His expression was complicated. Then what are they doing? Training, simulating dodging the killing curse. He went silent for a long time, then managed, Hogwarts is actually like this? When it struck someone, at most a harmless green patch of light appeared. It did no damage. Using that charm was like using blanks in a military drill. It simulated the killing curse without harm, and it wasn't illegal. 3 birds with 1 stone. It could also give the old headmaster a fright. 4 birds with 1 stone. As the holidays ended, Hogwarts transformed. Heavy wool cloaks, dragon-hide gloves, and thick scarves were shoved to the bottoms of trunks and replaced by lighter spring robes that shimmered in the sun. The weather warmed. Sunlight poured through the high castle windows, making warm patches on the stone floors. Outside, the forbidden forest turned lush, and the black lake glittered. Fish leapt and splashed back into the water. Students' moods brightened with the weather, except for those still fretting over overdue homework. Days flew by. Before long, it was the last week of May. The greenhouse felt like a steam room that afternoon. Professor Sprout had her class repotting mandrakes. The little plant's shrill wails punched through earmuffs and made everyone's heads ache. When class finally ended, the students felt like they had been pardoned. They peeled off their earmuffs and rubbed their ringing ears as they headed for the door. Lynn followed the crowd. "Mr. Lynn, please stay a moment." Professor Sprout's voice came from behind. He turned. She was tidying tools, mud-stained gloves slung over the edge of the workbench. Her smile was as gentle as ever. "Go to the Quidditch pitch at 9 o'clock tonight." "The Quidditch pitch?" "Yes," she said. "Mr. Bagman will be there to tell the champions what the third task is." Lynn realized how quickly time had passed. The second task had been intense, and between special training for Edgar and the others, taking care of Pet, and sneaking around the headmaster's office to spook Dumbledore, he'd almost forgotten the third task. "Understood, Professor," he said. Professor Sprout looked as if she wanted to say more. The brief instruction felt too dry for her, so she added, "Good luck." Lynn blinked. "Thank you, Professor." She gave a small cough and waved a hand. "Off you go now. Remember to be on time." Chapter 286, The Home is Gone Night, 8:30 p.m. Lynn left the Hufflepuff common room on time. As he crossed the entrance hall, he ran into Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who had just reached the outer door. "Lynn!" Harry quickened his pace when he spotted him. "You heading out now, too?" Lynn nodded. "Professor Sprout told us 9 at the Quidditch pitch." "Professor McGonagall said the same," Cedric added, curiosity in his voice. "I wonder what the third task will be." Roger yawned. "Whatever it is, it'll be a nuisance." The four of them left the castle gates together and crossed the dark lawn toward the Quidditch pitch. The late spring breeze carried the warm, sweet smell of grass. The forbidden forest loomed black in the distance, punctuated by occasional, unfamiliar cries. They passed through the players' tunnel and stepped onto the pitch. "Oh, this is something else." Lynn stopped. The whole field looked transformed. The flat, open lawn had been replaced by an elaborate, twisting hedge maze. The hedges were already 7 or 8 feet tall, packed tightly together, and under the moonlight they threw deep shadows that made the field mysterious and forbidding. The other champions had already gathered. Fleur stood not far off, with Chloe and Sophie behind her speaking in low voices. Crumb stood with his arms folded, expressionless as he stared at the maze. Louis and Katya flanked him, their faces taut with concern. Footsteps came from the other side of the pitch. Ludo Bagman emerged from beside a hedge, his usual broad smile in place. He wore bright yellow robes that glowed in the moonlight. "Good evening, champions," he called. All eyes turned to him. Bagman walked up to them, hands on his hips, looking around. "Well, isn't it coming along nicely?" Before anyone could answer, he went on. "In another month, we'll have them 30 feet high." He gestured proudly at the hedges. 30 feet. Imagine how spectacular that will be." Lynn looked up at the 7 or 8 foot hedges and tried to picture them at 30 feet. It would be impressive and oppressive. Bagman swept his gaze over the gathered champions, grinning. "You've probably worked out what we'll be doing here?" He paused for effect. "A maze," Fleur said, her French accent crisp. "Exactly," Bagman beamed. He pointed toward the heart of the maze, though nothing could be seen from the outside. "The Triwizard Cup will be at the very center. Whoever reaches it first wins." He waited, then added, "It's quite simple." The champions exchanged looks. A maze. It sounded simpler than the first 2 tasks. No giant beasts to fight, no diving underwater, just find your way through. But a 30-foot-high hedge maze at night could hide anything. "Hang on a moment." Ryan's voice cut through the murmur. Bagman turned to him. Ryan frowned. "The one who grabs the cup first wins. What about the points we earned earlier? Do they count for nothing?" "Of course they do," Bagman said, then explained. "The school leading the scoreboard will have its champions start closer to the center. In other words, higher-scoring champions will be given a starting point nearer the cup." He let that sink in, sweeping his eyes across the group. "So your lead is only temporary. Whether you ultimately take the Triwizard Cup depends on—" He stopped mid-sentence. Bagman's smile faded. He stared past the champions, toward the lake. Everyone turned. In the distance, toward the Black Lake, a thin wisp of black smoke had appeared by the Durmstrang ship. At first, it was barely noticeable against the night sky, and then in an instant the smoke surged. The Durmstrang ship became a vessel of fire. Flames tore upward into the night, lighting half the sky. The firelight painted the surface of the Black Lake like molten gold. Thick black smoke spiraled into the moonlit sky. The champions stood frozen, eyes glued to the sight. The 3 Durmstrang champions looked as if the world had been snatched from beneath them. They had only stepped out for a minute. Now their home was burning. They didn't wait for Bagman to finish. They bolted for the lake's shore and disappeared into the dark. "Black flames," Lynn murmured, narrowing his eyes at the towering inferno. The fire's color was wrong. Normal flames are orange and red, but at the edges of these flames there was a sickly, inky black. "Someone set the ship on fire," he said softly. Those nearby heard him. Cedric whipped his head around, his expression hardened. "A dark wizard?" he suggested. Lynn waved a hand. "I don't know." He glanced again at the burning vessel as the flames flared and the smoke thickened. "Let's go see." He drew his wand and pointed it at the sky. A moment later, from the direction of the castle, a broomstick shot toward him, arriving and hovering at his side. Without another word, Lynn swung his leg over and mounted it. He gripped the handle, pushed off, and the broom turned into a streak of light, hurtling toward the Black Lake. The night wind screamed past, and his robes snapped behind him. Cedric froze for a heartbeat, then drew his wand to summon his own broom, but nothing answered him. By the time he managed anything, Lynn was already streaking away. A harsh, pulsing alarm ripped through the Durmstrang ship and into its very bones. The sound was sharp and invasive, bouncing through the cramped woodwork of the vessel. Students shot up in their bunks. Some tumbled out of bed. Others sat stunned, trying to make sense of the noise. One by one, they stumbled into the corridor, rubbing their eyes. The passageway was already packed with people in nightclothes, robes barely thrown on, some barefoot. They scrambled toward the exits in a panic. "Fire!" someone shouted. "Run! The teachers aren't here. Neither is the headmaster. Run!" Screams, Chris, and the thud of running feet blended into a chaotic roar that shook the decks. Lynn arrived over the lake in time to see the ship fully engulfed. Flames spewed from cabin windows and licked along the hull. Thick black smoke rolled upward, blotting out the moon and stars. The acrid smell of burning filled the air, palpable even from a distance. On deck, students fled in every direction. Some tried to reach the rail to jump into the lake. Others were trampled, screaming as they were pressed underfoot. A few older students attempted to restore order, but panic drowned them out. Then a tongue of flame caught the rigging and began to scuttle up the ropes. It crept along the lines and across the canvas, leaving blackened trails in its wake. The sail ignited, and in an instant, the whole expanse became a wall of burning cloth. A groan of stressed timber came from the mast. Its base, already charred, began to give way. It tilted. The crowd on deck looked up and someone screamed, "The mast's falling!" People dove to escape, but the mast was angling right toward the densest cluster of students. Time seemed to slow. Lynn didn't hesitate. He raised his wand and cast a powerful banishing charm. A brilliant arc of light traced through the night, striking the falling mast first and slamming into it. Chapter 287. All curses end bang! The mast snapped free and flew sideways, smashing against the ship's rail. Splinters flew as it slid into the water and threw up a towering splash. The students, who had been clutching their heads and waiting for death, stared dumbfounded at the mast in the water and then at the figure suspended in midair. Lynn paid them no mind. His wand moved rapidly, sending invisible blades slicing through the air, swoosh, swoosh, ripping the already battered great ship into further ruin. One massive section of deck was neatly sliced off. Along with it, several students standing on that section were lifted by an unseen force and flung into the black lake. Smack! Splash! The survivors came up gasping, faces etched with the relief of having escaped. Lynn did not linger. He peered through the large hole he had cut and saw thick smoke belching from the cabin and flames leaping up inside. Through the haze, two students huddled in a corner, nearly unconscious from the smoke, coughing desperately. One of them met Lynn's eyes, and a light of hope instantly lit his face. Without a word, and true to his nature of seeing a rescue through, Lynn jumped in. His feet landed on the scorching deck. Flames roared around him, but a faint barrier around him held the heat and smoke at bay. The student who had looked up trembled with excitement. After Lynn's performance in the Triwizard Tournament, he was certain he'd been saved, and half-joking, stammered in broken English, "Mr. Lynn, I can't swim. Please, don't just throw me into the lake." Lynn ignored him and focused on the other student. The boy looked about 14 or 15, collapsed on the floor with one leg twisted unnaturally. Flesh was torn back from his calf, bone faintly visible. He howled in pain. Lynn wasted no words. He stepped forward and delivered a knife-hand strike to the boy's neck. The scream cut off. The boy's eyes rolled back and he slumped limply. Lynn hoisted him to his shoulder, then turned to the student who had spoken. "What did you just say?" he asked. The boy swallowed hard, glanced at Lynn's unconscious burden, then at Lynn's calm face. I didn't say anything," he blurted, sharp and decisive, as if that answered everything. Lynn nodded. He freed one hand and flicked his wand. A thick jet of water erupted from the tip, enveloping both of them, and whoosh! They were launched into the sky. They arched through the air, and then, splash, hit the lake. Lynn didn't spare them another look. He pushed deeper into the cabin. This Durmstrang ship had quality about it, Lynn thought as he moved through the corridors. The cabin walls were studded with 7 or 8 kinds of defensive charms, fire suppression wards, anti-explosion enchantments, strengthening spells, and several alchemical runes he couldn't identify at a glance. Without those protections, the fiendfire would have consumed the ship long ago. He kept going. In other cabins, he found more trapped students, pinned beneath fallen cabinets, jammed in warped doorframes, passed out from smoke. Lynn dragged them all free without comment. Then, splash, splash, splash. One by one, he sent them into the lake. Whether they could swim was not his immediate concern. There were already so many people in the water that one more or one less made little difference. Besides, Durmstrang students couldn't all be landlubbers. On the surface of the Black Lake, small boats intended for ferrying first years were arriving late, but now packed with people. The champions had finally reached them. Fleur stood at the bow, her silvery hair streaming in the night wind, waving her wand as jets of water pushed flailing students toward the boat. Cedric and Harry worked the stern, hauling those who reached them aboard. Ryan and Thomas leaned over the rail to grab sinking Durmstrang students. Jordan shouted from behind, "Hold on! Don't let go!" Amina stood amid the boat's cramped center, her hands moving fast as she transfigured floating planks into makeshift rafts. Crumb, Luis, and Katya were there too, grim-faced but relentless as they pulled classmates in. The small boats filled rapidly. The rescued Durmstrang students huddled together, soaked and shivering, some crying, some coughing, some silent, clutching their knees. The boats turned away from the burning great ship, and the people aboard finally allowed a breath of relief. Then a terrified scream pierced the night. Everyone looked up. Chaos exploded on the boats. From the burning ship, a mass of fiendfire erupted and condensed in the air, forming a gigantic black dragon. It twisted out of the smoke, its wingspan over 10 meters, eyes glowing coals of red fire. It circled once, then dove, trailing a scorched tail as it aimed straight for the small boats. Heat washed over them. Skin stung. Students screamed, ducked, and clutched their heads. Some simply shut their eyes to wait for the end. A thunderous roar like an engine split the night. All heads turned. High above, Lynn hovered on a broom. An unconscious student slumped across his arm. He stood between the dragon and the clustered boats, the firelight flickering across his face. He raised his wand. "Finite incantatem," he shouted. Ripples appeared in the air, like waves on water. The glow at the tip of his wand brightened and spread, condensing into a massive mirror-like surface, transparent but solid, forged from pure magic. It was big enough to cover the dozen or so small boats completely. The black dragon dove and slammed into that mirror with a roar. Boom! A dull, massive explosion rolled through the night. Ripples ran across the mirror from the point of impact like a stone tossed into a lake, and the surface throbbed with a strained humming. It did not shatter. The dragon thrashed, tearing with claws, snapping teeth, battering with wings. But the magic mirror held. Thick black smoke poured from the collision point, curling around Lynn like writhing serpents while heat licked at him. The wind tore at his robes and mussed his hair. His forehead strands fell into his eyes, but he did not move. He gripped his wand with both hands, arms trembling, and then he pushed down with all his strength. The dragon's head was forced down. It roared, a high-pitched refusal, the massive body struggling as wings flailed and tail whipped, but it could not lift its head. Chapter 288, Finding Fault Too Harshly. The students behind him gaped, faces full of shock. Under the moon and amid the flames, a lone figure on a broomstick grappled with a towering mass of fiendfire. Cedric was the first to react. He suddenly raised his wand, pointing its tip at the blazing form. Finite incantatem. A beam of light shot from his wand and struck the fiendfire. The fiery thing faltered for a heartbeat. Immediately after, finite incantatem. Finite incantatem. Finite incantatem. Fleur, Ryan, Thomas, Crumb. Beam after beam of counterspell light flashed from behind Lynn, the combined barriers pressing against the raging fiendfire. The lights braided together, working with Lynn's shield to hold the creature down. The fiendfire let out a high, long wail. Its shape twisted, deformed, and began to come apart. Black flames peeled away in chunks and dissolved into the air. The massive form grew smaller and more indistinct until, boom! With an earth-shattering roar, Lynn shoved the remaining fiendfire into the Black Lake. The impact threw up a towering wall of water, drenching everything to 10 meters and more. Ripples stampeded across the lake's surface and took a long time to die down. Small boats were flung up and away from the great wave, carried by its momentum. When the rescued students reached the shore, Professor McGonagall and several Durmstrang instructors hurried up from nearby. McGonagall ran ahead, robes fluttering, her usually neat bun unfastened and perspiration beading on her brow. She'd clearly sprinted over as soon as she'd heard. Her eyes swept the crowd and locked first on the 4 Hogwarts students, Cedric, Harry, Roger, and Lynn. She hurried to them, scanning them anxiously. "Are you all unharmed?" Cedric scratched his head with an embarrassed grin. "No, Professor McGonagall. We're fine." Harry shook his head to signal he was okay. Roger held up his hands, showing not a hair out of place. Lynn shook his head as well. McGonagall looked them over several times, and only after she was satisfied there were no obvious injuries did her shoulders ease a fraction. Only a fraction. She inhaled deeply and turned stern. "Mr. Lynn looked up. McGonagall fixed him with a sharp stare, choosing her words carefully. "I must remind you, and all of you," her gaze swept the others, "if you encounter something this dangerous again, do not approach. Leave it to the instructors." Lynn, who had heard McGonagall's warnings before, nodded repeatedly. "Yes, yes, Professor, you're right." Cedric and the others copied him, nodding like a chorus. "Right, right. It won't happen again. I promise. Won't happen again." McGonagall watched their dutiful display, the corner of her mouth twitching. She knew them too well, especially Lynn. Such promises were often for show. She sighed and waved a hand. "Very well. All of you go to the school infirmary and let Madame Pomfrey examine you properly. The Durmstrang instructors will handle the rest." The next morning, sunlight poured through the high castle windows, gilding the corridors with warm gold. Many Gryffindor and Ravenclaw students, as they woke, drifted to the windows to catch the first light. They drew back curtains, opened panes, and inhaled the fresh air. Then they froze. From the towers they looked down. The black lake still shimmered. The forbidden forest still stood dark green. The distant hills rolled as always. But something was missing. Where the Durmstrang ship had lain for nearly a year, there was only a heap of charred wreckage piled on the shore. The debris lay in a messy mound. Some pieces still smoked. Black ash drifted on the breeze, and a faint smell of burning hung in the air. Students blinked, rubbed their eyes, and a wild thought formed. Could that ruin be the Durmstrang ship? News raced through Hogwarts. By the time students reached the Great Hall, nearly everyone was talking about it. "Have you heard? The Durmstrang ship is gone." "What do you mean gone?" "Totally burned to a crisp." "For real? I saw it. There's a smoking pile on the shore." "What about the Durmstrang students?" "I don't know. I heard." Someone's voice dropped. "I heard they all perished." The Great Hall went silent for a beat. Then the Durmstrang students filed in. In mismatched pajamas and shuffling in pairs or threes, they sat at the long tables. Though their faces were drawn and red-rimmed, they were all alive. The rumor of total loss collapsed instantly. Krum sat at the Slytherin table, a dark scowl on his face. The other Durmstrang students were equally withdrawn. The mood among them was heavy. One braver student leaned over and asked, "Your ship, is it really gone?" Krum glanced at him. The questioner shrank back, but didn't flee. Silence stretched. Krum finally spoke, his tone low but audible to those nearby. "The ship was incinerated. Last night, a dark wizard used the Fiendfire curse on it." He let the word hang. At the mention of Fiendfire, the hall quieted further. Students who didn't know the spell asked in hushed tones, and when they learned its nature, they all sucked in cold breaths. "Fiendfire is one of the most vicious and dangerous fire spells," a Ravenclaw murmured. "It can burn almost anything and is very hard to control. If it gets out of control, the caster can be burned to death." "In a fire like that, they actually survived," whispers spread. Draco Malfoy, sitting near Krum, spoke up dryly. "You're lucky not to be dead." There was no sarcasm in his voice, only observation, but Krum's scowl deepened, and he stared at Malfoy in silence. A nearby girl then spoke up, voice sure and grateful. "It wasn't luck." Draco turned toward her. "Last night, it was Lynn who saved us." Draco paused, then nodded. "Not surprising, then." The girl brightened. "Do you have Lynn's contact? Could you give it to me?" "No." Draco's brief reply dimmed her enthusiasm, and she sighed. At that moment, the Great Hall doors opened again. Lynn and Edgar's little trio walked in, laughing and chatting, apparently oblivious to the tense atmosphere. Edgar said something, and Lynn laughed, slapping him on the shoulder. Lynn halted. The hall had gone completely silent, and every eye was fixed on him. He blinked, puzzled. "What's wrong?" As soon as the words left his mouth, all the Durmstrang students rose in unison. From a distance, they bowed deeply toward Lynn. Edgar and the others beside Lynn stood stunned, mouths dropping open. They looked first at the bowing students, then at Lynn, then back at the gathering in bewilderment. For a moment, all three thought the same thing. Lynn hadn't actually taken on the Durmstrang champion during the tournament and left the whole school begging him to back off, had he? The sight of the Durmstrang students bowing in unison to Lynn stunned everyone in the great hall. Forks froze midair, oil still gleaming on sausages, mouths hung open with half-chewed bread threatening to fall. A few students stood up instinctively, craning their necks as if afraid they'd miss seen. The hall fell almost unbearably silent. All eyes turned to Lynn. He stood in the entrance, taking in the synchronized bowing with an expression that was hard to read. He had traveled widely through the wizarding world. He'd seen trolls and werewolves, Death Eaters, and countless other dangers. He'd witnessed many spectacles, but he had never seen an entire school bow to a single student. The display was, frankly, a little over the top. Still, Lynn knew he couldn't let the moment hang. He had to fill the silence. He stepped forward and cleared his throat. Ahem, he smiled, measured, modest, magnanimous. Hogwarts and Durmstrang, and all the other participating schools here, share the same roots. We are brothers. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly across the hush of the hall. When a brother is in trouble, how can we stand aside? He let his gaze sweep the Durmstrang students still bowed before him. If Hogwarts were the one in trouble, I'm sure the students of Durmstrang would do their best to help. The words flowed smoothly, slipping into familiar rhetoric. The wizarding world is one family. True feelings show in a crisis. We are fellow travelers, not rivals. They were the kind of platitudes he'd heard and used at countless diplomatic occasions, but he delivered them with such tone, such timing, such expression, that anyone who didn't know better might believe he meant every word. Dumbledore, seated at the high table, felt his eyes sting. He raised a hand and dabbed at the corner of his eye with his sleeve, visibly moved. Professor McGonagall beside him watched the scene with a puzzled frown, glancing between Dumbledore and Lynn. She wondered if Dumbledore could not see through the smooth words, but she said nothing, because applause was breaking out. A few Durmstrang students clapped first, then Beau Bottons, then Ilvermorny, Uagadou, and Castello Bruxo joined in. Finally, Hogwarts students erupted into cheers. The great hall thundered with applause and shouts of approval. Lynn stood with a courteous smile, waving to the crowds like a politician at the close of an important speech. Edgar, standing behind him, could only stare, then leaned in and whispered, "Lynn, you really know how to put on a show." Lynn ignored him and kept smiling. By June, the final task of the Triwizard Tournament drew ever closer. The hedge maze by the Black Lake had shot up day by day. It was nearly 20 feet tall now, an impenetrable wall of layered dark green that looked like a living fortress. Excitement hummed through the castle. This year-long six-school contest would finally crown its champion, and everyone had an opinion. Who do you think will win? It has to be Lynn. He's leading by so many points. Don't be so sure. The maze is a different kind of challenge. Too many variables. I'll bet on Lynn. I'll take Cedric. Fleur's my pick. Not putting money on Harry. Predictions, bets, and arguments buzzed in corridors, common rooms, and the Great Hall. But beneath the fervor, tension occasionally flared. The disagreements weren't between the competing schools so much as inside Hogwarts itself. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw each had a champion. Slytherin had none. The Slytherins couldn't stomach the slight. Some of them, reasoning that, to resist outside pressure, we must settle our own house first, decided to back Durmstrang. After all, Durmstrang recruited tough fighters, an alignment Slytherins found appealing. That choice outraged the other houses. Of all schools you could support, you pick the one that's been last in 2 tasks? They sneered. Are you trying to provoke us? Yet the Slytherins defended themselves. They just had bad luck. Crumb is a world-famous player. Who we support is our business. A few went further. I hope Hogwarts gets wiped out. Better if none of them get out of the maze. We can give the Durmstrang champions extra training. Let them win. Such talk of aiding outsiders against their own school earned the Slytherins the label of traitors. Tempers flared. What began as verbal sparring in the corridors turned into pushing and shoving, then into mass brawls. Spells flew, fists and feet were thrown. By the time prefects and teachers arrived, the corridor was a chaos of sprawled students. Over a dozen were sent to the infirmary, moaning on cots. Madame Pomfrey bandaged them with a scowl. Fighting! Fight until you're injured. If there's a next time, I'll have Professor Dumbledore expel you all. The spectacle gave students from the other schools a new impression of Hogwarts. Are they always this brutal with their own? An Ilvermorny student asked. Ryan nodded. You get used to it. Lynn heard about the brawls while sitting by the Black Lake, watching the water and sighing. Edgar told him the story, and Lynn was quiet for a long time. Was it really necessary? He asked at last. Edgar shrugged. Who knows? I can't understand those Slytherins. Lynn sighed again, and then remembered something. By the way, Durmstrang's ship burned. Where are they staying now? I haven't seen them around Hogwarts much lately. Edgar faltered. I think they moved to Hogsmeade. I heard Karkaroff booked an entire inn. Lynn nodded slowly. Still too risky. Is Hogsmeade as safe as Hogwarts? Chapter 290, The Competition Begins. Under that charged atmosphere, June 24th finally arrived. From morning, the Great Hall buzzed like a hive. Although the younger students still had 2 exams left, nobody was focused on them. Conversations swirled instead around the final showdown in a few hours. Lynn was restored to his celebrity treatment early. As soon as he sat at the Hufflepuff table, a mountain of food materialized in front of him, almost all Chinese dishes. Steamed buns, deep-fried dough sticks, tofu pudding, savory crepes, chive pockets, beef noodles, meat burgers, hot and sour noodles. Lynn stared blankly for a moment. Several pairs of eyes were fixed on him. A girl to his left jumped up and pressed a plate of pies toward him as if about to feed them directly into his mouth. To his right, Justin Finch Fletchley put down his fork and stood, about to run to the kitchen. Wait, wait, Lynn hurriedly called out. Justin paused and turned back. Lynn, do you need anything else? Lynn didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No, really, I don't need anything else. This is more than enough. Justin looked at the pile, looked at him, nodded, and sat down. But Ernie Macmillan beside him sprang up again. Lynn, I'll have the house elves bake a few more meat pies for you. You can take them if you get hungry during the match. No need, thanks. Should I get you some butterbeer? No, that's fine too. Then, Ernie, Lynn cut him off, sit down and eat. Only then did Ernie sit, though he kept glancing at Lynn. Lynn sighed and lowered his head to tackle the heap of food. At one point, Justin leaned over with a slip of paper. By the way, your current odds of winning the cup are 1-1.1, he said. You could say you're leading by a mile. Lynn nodded and kept eating. Nearby Edgar watched with visible envy. Lynn, he said softly, are you already enjoying life after retirement? If you can run the maze for me, Lynn replied without looking up, I'll pass the treatment along. Edgar snapped his mouth shut without another word. At dusk, the setting sun painted the horizon warm orange and deep purple, spilling its afterglow over Hogwarts's towers and gilding the old stones. Everyone ate early and drifted toward the Quidditch pitch in small, excited clusters. The crowd, laughter, chatter, movement, felt like a festival. When Lynn and the others reached the pitch, the sight stopped them. The field had been transformed. A hedge over 30 feet tall, a thick dark green wall now encircled the entire pitch. The hedge was so dense nothing could be seen inside. Its top was neatly trimmed, casting heavy shadows in the dying light. A dozen or so dark openings gaped along the rim like the mouths of giant beasts, one entrance for each champion. Above the pitch, the giant floating screen looped a barrage of advertisements. Compared to the earlier tasks, there were far more ads this time. Honeyduke's Sweet Shop wishes the champions a sweet victory. Zonko's Joke Shop, the secret weapon to make your opponents laugh themselves into surrender. Epoch-making alchemy, the champion's first choice. The 28 broomstick, get out of the maze first. Lynn glanced at that last ad, and the corner of his mouth curled. Allie had timed that placement well. He turned away and looked to the entrances. Champions were gathered in small groups, chatting. Most seemed relaxed. After the first 2 tasks, the edge of tension had worn off. Besides, many had accepted that winning the cup was essentially hopeless. Setting low expectations let them ease off and enjoy themselves. Ryan was leaning against the hedge, talking with Thomas and Jordan. Seeing Lynn, he waved. Lynn, over here. Lynn walked over. Ryan eyed him up and down and clicked his tongue. You don't look nervous at all. Lynn shrugged. What's there to be nervous about? Go in, take a walk, find the cup, come out. Ryan almost choked. You make it sound so easy. Lynn smiled. Otherwise, go in crying? They both laughed. Conversation continued as more champions milled about. Then Ludo Bagman appeared in his garish yellow and purple robes, holding a small cloth bag. Good evening, champions. He drew several palm-sized metal cylinders from the bag and handed one to Cedric. These are distress signal devices. If you get into trouble and need rescue, fire a signal flare into the sky. Someone will come to help. The cylinders looked like Muggle fireworks, silver casings with a red button on the end. The champions accepted them and nodded. Also, Bagman's expression sobered. I must emphasize the rules. He cleared his throat. First, no flying items. Using Oxio to summon brooms, flying carpets, or similar objects is forbidden. At once, all eyes flicked to the Hogwarts champions. Roger went slightly red. Cedric redder. Harry's face flushed completely. The three of them exchanged looks. They had, in fact, considered that loophole. Lynn, watching their faces, almost laughed out loud. Second, Bagman continued, you may not damage the maze's layout. This includes, but is not limited to, digging holes, smashing walls, or otherwise altering the structure. Everyone's gaze swung to Lynn. He scratched his head. He'd thought of that too. Those are the only two restrictions. Beyond that, it's up to your skills. He finished handing out the cylinders and hurried toward the commentary box, his voice floating back. Good luck to you all. Following staff guidance, the champions moved to their designated entrances. Bagman's voice, magically amplified, cut through the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, he trilled for effect, drawing out the moment. The final task of the Triwizard Tournament is about to begin. A roar rose from the stands, swelling in waves that made the pitch vibrate. Golden snitch-like devices zipped toward the champions from all directions as the advertisements on the giant screen vanished. In their place were the faces of the 19 champions hurrying to their entrances. The cheering swelled even louder. Seems the champions aren't ready yet, Bagman joked, so let me remind you of the standings and really let everyone feel the gap. He cleared his throat. In first place, Lynn, 179 points. Lynn's image enlarged on the screen. Beside it, the scores from the first two tasks and his total gleamed in gold. Hogwarts students around the pitch cheered as if being invaded. In the Hufflepuff stands, Edgar stood at the front, arms raised, clapping until his voice was hoarse. William and Ollie watched proudly behind him. Behind Mr. Lynn, Bagman continued, are the Ilvermorny champions with 148 points, in third place. His voice rolled down the rankings. When he reached Durmstrang, 10 points, the stadium fell into a short, stunned silence that was quickly broken by suppressed laughter. Durmstrang students dropped their heads, wishing for holes to hide in. Bagman pretended not to notice and carried on. Scores for each school are appearing in order, and now, he drew the suspense out. Every champion has now arrived at their entrance and is in position. On the giant screen, 19 images froze. 19 champions standing before 19 dark mouths of the hedge, waiting for the command. The night wind whispered through the leaves. The stands grew quiet. Everyone held their breath. Through the detectors, Bagman's voice reached the champions. Are you ready? 19 voices answered, some loud, some tremulous, some calm, but all clear. Ready. 19. Good. Bagman inhaled and lifted the whistle. 3, 2, 1. Let the match begin. Chapter 291. Who's talking about me? After a brief whistle, the champions filed into the maze entrances ahead of them, greeted by a wave of applause and cheers. The ovation lingered like a tide behind them. But the moment Lynn stepped inside, those sounds were swallowed. Everything went quiet. Only his footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor. Lynn stopped and looked back. The entrance was still there. The stars twinkled in the night sky, and the distant stands were packed with figures. But the clamor, the cheering and noise was gone, as if an invisible barrier had split the outside world from the inside of the maze. He shook his head and kept walking. He hadn't gone far when a curtain of light descended from above. It materialized out of thin air, a faint green glow stretching from the top of the hedge to the ground, completely blocking the path. At the same time, the hedges along the walls began to squirm. Branches and leaves, as if alive, wove themselves together to form a line of text beside the light curtain. You still have one last chance to leave here. Take the advice, otherwise the consequences are not something you can bear. Lynn stared at the light curtain, then at the hedge lettering, then back at the curtain. It looked menacing. The green light and that ominous tone could intimidate someone. But Lynn had seen worse. He stepped straight through. The curtain did nothing. He looked back at it as it glowed and shook his head. No one would actually be frightened by this stage, would they? He thought, and continued on. Soon the curtain's light no longer reached the path ahead, and darkness swallowed everything. Only the rough ground under his feet and the towering hedges on either side reminded him he was still in the maze. Lynn raised his wand. Lumos. A soft light bloomed from the tip of his wand and pierced the dark. He crept forward cautiously for a few minutes. Then the maze itself began to move. The hedges rustled and slowly shifted, rotated, and rearranged. The sound of leaves and branches rubbing together cut through the silence like a nest of snakes. Lynn watched as the hedges quickened their motion until 7 different paths formed before him, each winding in a different direction and vanishing into blackness. He had never trusted luck. After so many years of fishing, it was obvious to him that luck rarely had anything to do with his successes, so he chose the path that looked the least appealing. If it turned out wrong, at least he could say he picked the worst one on purpose. He walked a few hundred meters more. The path stayed narrow, and the hedges remained looming. The only sounds were his own footsteps and breathing. Then something appeared ahead. A piggy bank, locked with a little brass padlock, lying quietly in the middle of the road and glinting faintly in his wand light. Floating above it was a wooden sign that read, "There is no treasure here." Lynn stared at the sign. Shouldn't this sort of thing be for Harry Potter? As a Gryffindor, he'd expect that kind of curiosity and trap. "I'm Hufflepuff," Lynn thought with a private grin. Still, he couldn't help being curious, not about what treasure might be inside, but about the mind that designed this taunt. He took a breath and moved closer to the piggy bank. He raised his wand and aimed at the tiny brass lock. Alohomora. Before he finished the spell, a Peter's jolt suddenly triggered. Lynn was ready. He turned and ran without hesitation. Boom, boom, boom. A deafening roar erupted behind him. The corridor walls began compressing inward with incredible force, metal fittings clanging against each other as the two sides crashed together in a violent, repeating rhythm. The compression was so powerful and so fast the entire passage shook. Lynn ran while glancing back and cursed under his breath. What kind of grudge is this? Reinforced metal in the hedges? Are you trying to crush someone to death? Gravel and debris flew with each metallic clash. He ran until he could run no more, then stopped and watched as the two walls continued their relentless banging like a broken mechanism. He waited. They kept clanging. Impatient, he raised his wand and aimed at the madly colliding walls. Finite incantatem. Light shot from his wand and sank into the two walls. The squeezing halted abruptly. The hedges slowly relaxed, and the corridor returned to normal. Lynn holstered his wand and returned to where the piggy bank had been. It lay in pieces, crushed by the walls, fragments scattered across the ground. Yet among the debris, something caught his eye, a small gleam. He knelt and found a dozen or so galleons nestled among the splinters. Lynn picked up a galleon and weighed it in his hand. Real. He blinked. Real money in a trap? At the commentary box, Ludo Bagman was frantically shoving aside a pile of control equipment. His face was flushed, sweat beaded at his temples, and he kept muttering to himself. "Fuck," he swore. "Put the wrong piggy bank in. My galleons." Back in the maze, the perspective shifted to one of the earlier victims, Katya, a Durmstrang champion. He moved slowly and cautiously through a narrow corridor, the faint light at his wand tip barely illuminating the steps ahead. Katya had developed a psychological scar from Lynn during the first 2 tasks and had resolved to stay as far away from him as possible. Winning felt out of reach. If he could just exit the maze without meeting monsters or ghosts, he would be thankful. As he rounded a corner, he froze. Not far ahead lay an open circular clearing. On a stone platform in the center burned a familiar object, the goblet, flames licking around it, making it stand out starkly in the darkness. But Katya's eyes were not on the goblet. He was staring at the figure beside it. Black hair, oriental features, a hair-raising, grim smile. Standing beneath the goblet with folded arms and looking directly at him was Lynn. Katya's pupils shrank. He stammered. The crowd in the stands went silent. "What's going on?" someone cried. "How are there two of him? He was just on another path." Ludo Bagman's voice rang out, laced with contrived confusion. "Dear audience, there are some special situations in the maze. Mr. Katya seems to have encountered a Lynn." Katya stood frozen, his lips trembling, teeth chattering, his face drained of color. Lie, Lynn. He could barely spit the name out. The mimic watched him with a smile that deepened. Then, with an eerie, chilling tone, it spoke. "Durmstrang Master, seeing me, can you not even speak?" Katya swallowed hard. "Lynn, how could you appear here?" The figure took a step forward. Katya took one back. "Are you so afraid of me appearing in front of you?" the mimic taunted. It took another step. "Master!" The word was dragged out long and airy, dripping with sarcasm and malice. Katya went paler by the second. He thought, how does it know? He did it in secret. No one knew. The stands erupted in whispers. What? It was Katya who put Lynn's name in. That Azkaban Institute of Higher Learning entry was his. Why would he do that? Rumors swelled like a tide. Katya watched the fake Lynn approach, his fear culminating in a flash of desperate anger. He gripped his wand. "Die!" he bellowed, firing a corrosive curse from his wand straight at the mimic. The spell struck its target, but no blood spurted and no scream came. The mimic's body rippled where the curse hit, and Katya froze, horrified. His mind raced and then slammed into a realization. Shame and fury washed over his face. "Boggart!" he shouted. Everyone in the stands stared at the big screen, looking at Katya's ferocious expression. After a long, awkward pause, Ludo Bagman cleared his throat and announced in a dry, uncomfortable voice, it seems Mr. Katya has encountered a boggart." He hesitated again. "And, that boggart seems to know some, very interesting things." The crowd's chatter rose, more heated than before. "It really is him. He put Lynn's name in. Why would he do that? Jealousy, maybe. Serves him right. Let the boggart scare him to death." In the Hufflepuff stands, Edgar, William, and Ollie exchanged looks. "So," Edgar said with difficulty, "it was Katya?" William pushed up his glasses. "Seems like it." Back in the maze, Lynn pushed forward, still feeling his way, completely unaware of the spectacle unfolding elsewhere. He sneezed and rubbed his nose, frowning. "Strange," he muttered. "Who's talking about me?" Lynn kept walking down the path and entered a much narrower lane. It sloped gently downward. The hedges thinned away, and rough earthen walls replaced them. The air grew damp, smelling of soil and humus. The ground underfoot softened, leaving shallow prints with every step. He met no real danger, only the occasional pothole, which he skirted carefully. At the far end of the lane, the passage was completely blocked by a vast tangle of thick white lines. A giant spider web sealed the way. It stretched up 3 or 4 meters, packed tightly from floor to ceiling. Each silk thread was as thick as a rope, arranged in neat, regular patterns, shimmering silver white in the light of the Lumos spell. Lynn's eyes brightened. This silk would be worth a fortune. His gaze tracked to the center of the web, where an unusually large spider perched, an acromantula. Its body was pitch black and bristly. Its 8 legs were lined with dense barbs, each as thick as a finger. Most striking was its head. Where there should have been 8 eyes, only 7 remained, one socket a healed scar. One of its fangs was missing as well. The acromantula dropped from the web, its legs landing with soft thuds, and stood before Lynn. The students in the stands tensed at once. "An acromantula! Danger! Lynn's gonna fight again!" Some clenched their fists, bracing for a battle. Then the acromantula spoke. Its voice was hoarse and grating, but the words stunned everyone. Master Lynn," it said tremulously. "You are also participating in the competition." A dead silence fell over the stands. Master Lynn?" people murmured. Lynn paused, looked at the spider, and raised an eyebrow. "Now that you know," he said flatly, "why didn't you move out of the way?" The spider shuddered at the tone. Without another word, it turned and ran back, scrambled up to the web, raised its front legs, and slash, 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 tore the carefully woven net to shreds. Silk threads snapped and fell, those priceless strands littering the ground. When the web was down, the spider turned, bent its legs, and made a pleading gesture. "Master Lynn, Please come in, it begged. The humility in its posture and the fawning tone shocked the onlookers. Lynn nodded once and stepped forward. Then he stopped. The acromantula froze, looking up at him with its 7 eyes, confused. Do you have anything else? It asked, voice small. Lynn didn't reply. He simply stared the spider up and down, from the missing eye to the missing fang, down to its trembling legs. The more he inspected it, the more the spider trembled, feeling crawled over by his gaze. Finally, Lynn spoke. I remember you, he said. You run very fast. For a moment, the acromantula went blank. Then it began to nod wildly, its head bobbing like a pestle. If it hadn't been fast, it thought, it would have been killed long ago. It forced what might be called a smile and answered, in an even more obsequious voice, Please tell me what to do. I would go through fire and water for you. Lynn waved a hand. Not a big deal, he said. Be my mount for a while. No problem, the spider agreed without hesitation. It would be my greatest honor. The giant spider crouched and lowered itself at Lynn's feet. He lifted a leg and climbed up. Go, he ordered. With all 8 legs driving at once, the acromantula shot forward with a whoosh. 8 legs proved faster than 2. Within moments, Lynn had covered hundreds of meters. The night wind whistled past, and the tunnel walls slid by. The spider ran with remarkable stability. With legs hitting alternately, there was almost no jolt. Lynn sat on its back as comfortably as if he were on a broom. Ludo Bagman's voice carried over the arena, laced with disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lynn, it seems he's tamed an acromantula as a mount. He hesitated. According to the rules, this isn't a violation. The rules prohibit flying objects, not riding magical creatures. A murmur went through the stands. That's allowed? What did he do to that spider? Didn't you hear? That spider called him Master Lynn. What sort of acquaintance would make an acromantula act like that? Inside the maze, Lynn relaxed on the spider's back. The ride was almost as good as a broomstick. If they kept this pace, he'd reach the center quickly. He patted the spider's head. Not bad. Keep going. The acromantula sped up at the encouragement. Then Ludo's voice cut in again. Wait, his direction seems off. A giant screen showed a holographic map of the maze with the champions marked. Lynn's blip was moving fast, but not toward the center. He's heading toward the other champions. What's going on? Chaos erupted in the stands. Is he going to intercept them? Another fight? Where's the Durmstrang champion? Lynn glanced at the distance markers and realized he should have reached the finish by now. He patted the spider again. Stop for a moment. The acromantula halted and looked around. Where are we? Lynn asked. The spider glanced about and fell silent. You don't know the way? Lynn pressed. The acromantula's voice shrank. I usually stay in the Forbidden Forest. I've never been here. Lynn exhaled. The spider's 7 eyes dropped from his gaze and its legs began to tremble. Of all things, the acromantula had no sense of direction. All that running had been pointless. Lynn rubbed his forehead and patted the spider's head again. Keep going. Just go wherever. The spider brightened and resumed moving, but more cautiously. Its speed dropped, and it kept glancing around, trying to recognize landmarks. In the stands, those who had wagered heavily on Lynn seethed. A third-year Gryffindor boy clutched his head and wailed, I saved my pocket money for a year. I bet it all on Lynn. And now he's riding a lost spider around the maze? The girl beside him went pale. It's the first time I've seen a spider with no sense of direction. It's just bizarre. Ludo switched the broadcast to the other champions' encounters. Fleur was besieged by Cornish pixies that insisted on braiding her hair. She waved her wand to shoo them off, but as one set was driven away, another arrived. Roger Davies walked into a dead end, turned to retrace his steps, and found the way he'd come sealed. He stood bewildered. Ryan Sanderson had met a sphinx, answered a riddle wrong, and was now being chased. Amina Okoro paused at a fork, closed her eyes, and picked a path at random, as calm as if she were out for a stroll. Harry Potter was being chased by a pack of blast-ended scroots, fleeing with several holes burned through his robes. Cedric Diggory strolled on untroubled, his luck enviably good. A Bosbitton's girl named Chloe was frozen, captivated by a singing mushroom. Daniel from Castellabruxo chased a niffler clutching a galleon, both dashing through the passages. Nema and Wanjiru of Uwagado had been separated again after meeting and were calling for each other as the distance between them grew. Finally, the screen showed Crumb. He walked with steady steps through a dim corridor. A faint, melodious song drifted ahead, beautiful, strangely moving, and laced with an unnameable charm. Crumb stopped and frowned. The singing grew closer, and a figure turned the corner. A woman approached, draped in a sheer gauze dress that clung to a graceful figure. Her waist swayed and her skirt fluttered with every step. A thin veil covered her face, leaving it indistinct and inviting imagination. Crumb gripped his wand. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman didn't answer. She continued to sing, each step a sway. She reached out and rested a cool, delicate hand on his shoulder, soft and almost boneless. She leaned in and whispered, "Come with me. There's a nice place." Her voice was honeyed and seductive. Crumb's eyes clouded. His wand slipped and pointed downward. The woman took his hand and led him toward a hidden side cave. He began to follow. A gust of wind lifted the veil, and the illusion shattered. Crumb saw her face, pallid skin, sagging wrinkles, a collapsed nose, yellow, uneven teeth, and eyes cloudy as dead fish. Crumb's daze vanished in an instant and was replaced by raw terror. Crumb was so terrified that all 5 of his limbs went weak at once. In his daze, the female ghost's hair suddenly lashed out and wrapped around him like a living python, coiling tight until he could not move. The ghost erupted in a high, piercing cackle that echoed through the narrow hedge tunnel. She dragged Crumb along, chittering as she burrowed deeper into the maze. He struggled, but the hair held him fast. His body sank deeper into the hedges until he vanished completely. Moments later, a shriek tore out from within the maze. The sound pierced the hedges and carried through the stands, making people's skin crawl. Ludo Bagman, watching in the commentator's box, hastily stopped the detector that had been probing the hedge. He stared at the pitch-black hole and after a long pause managed to say, "We can't see what's happened to Crumb anymore, but judging by that scream, he may be badly hurt." He hesitated, then added, "I can't say whether his life is in danger, but one thing is certain, he's going to lose some skin." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept the crowd. "Lose skin? What do you mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. Can a female ghost even do that? Who knows? Either way, he's in trouble." While Crumb fought desperately to free himself from the ghost's hair, Harry heard that scream faintly from far inside the maze, but he had no time to worry. He was running for his life. Having narrowly escaped those mutated fire crabs, Harry Potter is now being pursued by acid beetles. Ludo's voice blared over the arena with dramatic fervor. The venom secreted by this creature is highly corrosive. It can burn skin and some low-level protective enchantments instantly. It's extremely dangerous. On the big screen, Harry was sprinting flat out, a huge, glossy black beetle in pursuit. Its carapace was patterned with eerie markings. Viscous liquid dripped from its mouthparts and sizzled white when it hit the ground, corroding pits into the surface. Harry was breathless when suddenly, the scar on his forehead flared with pain. It hit him without warning, fierce, stabbing, like a red-hot iron pressed to his brow. His knees buckled and he nearly fell. Then the pain vanished as suddenly as it had come. Harry's reflexes were faster. "Protego!" he yelled, whirling and pointing his wand behind him. An invisible, solid wall sprang up in an instant. The beetle's venom smashed against it, splashing everywhere. Where the venom hit the hedge, branches and leaves blackened and withered with a hissing sound. Foiled in its first strike, the beetle took to the air to attack again. Just as Harry prepared another spell, the scar erupted again, harder than before. A piercing agony exploded from his forehead, as if someone were twisting a knife in his brain. His head felt like it was being split in two. His vision swam and the world tilted. Then he saw it. He was sitting in a chair. In front of him knelt over a dozen figures in black robes, their foreheads pressed to the floor in a fanatical, reverent posture. In their midst stood an enormous cauldron. Something bubbled within it, and an eerie green light shimmered up. A voice, rasping, cold, and laden with a crushing presence, intoned, "My loyal servants." The voice drew the words out. "Bring Harry Potter back. Announce to the world the return of the Dark Lord." Harry snapped his eyes open. The expected sting of the beetle's venom was gone. He sucked in air, cold sweat running down his face, his wand still clutched in his white-knuckled hand. Then he heard chewing. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The rhythm of it, like something feasting. He clutched his forehead and turned slowly. He froze. Lynn stood nearby beside an acromantula. The spider crouched with its 8 legs tucked under it, obedient and almost dog-like. Fragments of shell littered its mouth as it chewed. At its feet lay the remains of an acid beetle, peeled open, gutted, several legs snapped off and discarded. Lynn held his wand and pointed at the pile. "I don't want this bit," he said, gesturing toward a piece of the beetle's abdomen. "It's useless. You can have it." The acromantula leaned forward and swallowed it in one gulp. "This will do," Lynn said, indicating a sack-like object on the beetle's back. "That's a sack. Keeping it." With a flick of his wand, the sack detached and floated before him. He took a bottle from his pocket and put the sack inside. And this. The acromantula had already reached out with a front leg and dragged another piece toward its mouth. "Oi! Stop that!" Lynn rapped it on the head with his wand. The spider withdrew its leg and looked at him with pleading, seven-eyed blinking. Lynn pointed at the piece still half in the spider's mouth, one of the beetle's appendages. "Spit it out!" The acromantula opened its mandibles, but more than half the appendage had already been swallowed. It blinked imploringly. Lynn blinked back. "Fine, fine. One more or one less won't matter." The spider brightened and resumed gnawing contentedly. Lynn turned and saw Harry sitting up. "Yo," he called. "Awake? Thought you'd be out for longer." Harry, still holding his forehead and dizzy, managed, "Thanks, Lynn." "You should thank me," Lynn said with a casual nod. "One rescue per task. Next time I'll charge." Harry said nothing. Lynn's gaze fell to Harry's hand on his brow. "Why are you clutching your forehead? That beetle didn't do much to you, did it?" He kicked the pile of beetle remains with the toe of his boot. Harry recovered enough to remember the advice the old headmaster had once given him when his scar ached. Sometimes you shouldn't read too much into dreams. He shook his head. "It's nothing," he said, lowering his hand. "My scar just hurt, and I dreamed nonsense." Lynn eyed the lightning-shaped mark on Harry's forehead suspiciously. "You should get it checked at St. Mungo's," he said, uncharacteristically serious. "Could be something tricky. If it's cured, it won't hurt anymore." Harry nodded. "I'll go during the summer break." Lynn said no more. He swung his leg over the acromantula and settled onto its back. The spider, obedient as ever, pushed off with all 8 legs and rose. Watching them prepare to leave, Harry suddenly called out, "Hey!" Lynn glanced back. "You're welcome," he shouted, waving a hand. The acromantula shot forward with astonishing speed and vanished around the nearest bend in a blink. Harry's hand was still raised. Words that he wanted to call out stuck in his throat. After a few seconds, he managed. "The entrance is that way." But Lynn was gone. The spider was too fast for his voice to catch up. Time slid by. Darkness fell completely. Thick clouds swallowed the moon and stars. No natural light penetrated the maze. The only points of illumination were the Lumos charms at the tips of the champions' wands, faint, flickering stars in the gloom. But the night brought something else. The creatures in the maze grew more active. Things that had hunkered down in corners, hidden deep in the hedges, or sheltered in burrows during the day began to stir. A sharp whistle cracked the night. On the big screen, a red flare burst above the maze. Bright and alarming. The crowd gasped. "Someone's called for help! Who is it?" The screen cut to Chloe Bell, Beauxbaton's champion, slumped on the ground, pale and gasping. Her robes were torn and blood stained her skin. Several blast-ended scroots paced nearby, held back by her spells. Staff rushed in, and soon she was helped up and led out, the end of her third task. More time passed. Another flare shot up. Nicholas Santos of Castellabruxo, swarmed by Ashwinders, had to signal for help. Another, Louis Auguste of Durmstrang, reached a dead end ringed with guillotines and had no choice but to call out. Another, Sophie Bell, terrified by a giant spider, fired her signal. Brilliant fireworks stitched the sky one by one as champions fell during the final task. The stands tightened with tension. Who is it now? Nima of Ouagadougou. Is Beauxbaton's wiped out? Is Katya the only Durmstrang champion left? Thomas from Ilvermorny is out too. The big screen survivor list shortened steadily. Amina Okoro, one of the favorites, with odds at 1-2.1, had been ambushed by a swooping evil lurking in the shadows and didn't manage to transfigure in time. More flashes, more names. Jordan from Ilvermorny out, Roger from Hogwarts out. At last, the fireworks ceased and the maze fell relatively quiet. On the screen, the final list of survivors settled. Lynn, Harry, Cedric, Fleur, Katya, and Ryan. The Hogwarts benches erupted in thunderous cheers. 3 champions still in the maze. Victory felt nearly assured. All the more surprising was that Katya from Durmstrang remained among them. No one had expected that. Chapter 294. This is getting really funny. A woo. The howls of wolves drifted from the forbidden forest, clear and eerie in the still night that lay over the Quidditch pitch. They rose and fell, sometimes near, sometimes far, cutting through the quiet. Most of the spectators in the stands, however, had already begun to doze. The match had been going on for hours. The initial excitement had worn off, and only a long wait remained. Some leaned back and napped, some nodded off with their heads bobbing, others pulled their robes up and slept through the rest of it. Ludo Bagman was still forcing himself to stay awake, his eyes fixed on the few flickers of movement within the maze. He muttered to himself, slurring as fatigue took hold. Lynn is still there. Cedric is still there. Fleur is still there. Harry, Ryan, Katya. Katya, too. He had been listing champions until his voice trailed off. The traps in the maze had revealed themselves to be the usual sorts: plants, animals, and alchemy, things the champions could handle if they were careful. The monsters had been fought, the forced detours taken, the stepping stones triggered. Now it came down to finding the cup. It was only a matter of who would reach it first. Everyone hung on, waiting for the last champion to emerge. Ludo's chin dipped lower and lower until it seemed about to thud down on the commentary desk. Ring, ring, ring! A sharp phone ringtone blared from the judge's table. Ludo shot upright so fast he nearly toppled the desk. What's going on? Is there a fire? Beside him, Dumbledore was jolted awake by his own phone. He checked the caller ID, Cornelius Fudge. The old headmaster frowned and pressed the answer button. Albus! Fudge's voice came through, breathless and panicked. Dark wizards are rampaging on Muggle streets. The Ministry is overwhelmed. Can you? Where? Dumbledore interrupted. Privet Drive. Dumbledore's face tightened. There was a flash of flame, and as if wrenched by magic, he was gone from the main stage. The other heads of schools glanced at the flash and, used to Dumbledore's sudden departures, went back to what they were doing. No one else noticed. Deep inside the maze, a green flash lit a narrow passage. Lynn rode on the broad back of an acromantula, lying back with his hands behind his head and watching the night sky slit by over the hedges. The steady rhythm of its 8 legs was almost hypnotic and made him sleepy. His mind, wandering, reeled over the important question of what to eat if he won. Squirrel-shaped mandarin fish? Snow-white bean paste balls? The first was sweet and sour, crispy outside and tender inside, but a bother to make. The second was soft and sweet, but could become cloying if you ate too many. Why not both? Lynn nodded to himself, an eminently sensible plan. The acromantula rounded a corner smoothly, just as footsteps pounded in the darkness ahead, fast and unsteady, tap-tapping closer. A figure burst from the shadows, Fleur Delacour. Her face was white, silver hair disheveled, robes streaked with mud and grass. She was breathing hard and gripping her wand, panic written across her features. She reared back as the acromantula blocked her path and flicked a severing charm toward the spider's legs. Lynn raised his own wand and conjured a shield charm. The severing charm smashed into it with a shower of sparks. Only then did Fleur see the person sitting on the spider's back. Lynn, relief flooded her, and she sagged like a deflated balloon. Lynn sat up and looked at her. What happened? You look terrified. I think I just saw a dark wizard. Lynn blinked. A dark wizard? Yes, Fleur nodded hard. Someone in a black hooded robe. She hesitated, uncertainty in the words. I don't really know. I saw a hooded figure at a corner. It flashed past, but I feel like something's wrong. Fleur's face was still pale and her eyes wide. She gripped her wand so tight her knuckles were white. Lynn thought she might be letting fear feed itself. Still, what if she was right? If a dark wizard had slipped into the maze, it would be far worse. He patted the acromantula's head. I'll go check ahead. The spider was about to step forward when Fleur spread her arms, blocking him. Lynn looked at her. Is there more? She took a steadying breath. Take me with you. Lynn raised an eyebrow. I'll lead the way, she insisted. I know the direction. He thought it over. Leaving her here, if there really was a dark wizard, didn't feel right. Better to keep his eye on her. He reached out a hand. Come up. Fleur took his hand and was hauled onto the spider beside him. They sat close, her scent, mud, sweat, and her perfume wafted over him, but he didn't mind. "Which way?" he asked. "Straight ahead, then turn left at the second intersection," she said. He nodded and urged the acromantula on. The only sounds were the spider's steady thudding and the two of them breathing. Fleur sat silent behind him. Lynn stared into the darkness ahead. After several dozen meters, she suddenly whispered, "Look over there." Lynn glanced in the direction she pointed. A cold prickling ran down his spine, and his every nerve went alert. Something, an instinct, screamed at him. Then a voice, right behind his ear, began to hiss one word, "Impy." The single syllable, imperio, hit him like ice. Lynn's muscles reacted before his brain fully registered. He slammed his right elbow backward with brutal force. The blow struck the wand Fleur had just raised. With a sharp snap, her wand was knocked aside. A curse erupted from its tip. It veered off course, nicked Lynn's ear, and struck the hedge. With a sizzling crack, the hit portion of the hedge exploded into twisted, writhing vines that grew out like living ropes. Fleur's features flickered with something hard and ruthless. Her other hand lunged to seize the hand Lynn used to hold his own wand, clearly trying to disarm or restrain him. But Lynn was faster. He whirled, lightning in motion, and his left hand shot out. He grabbed her wrist, the one clutching her wand, and twisted so hard she yelped, and the wand slipped from her fingers into his hand. Without hesitating, Lynn pointed Fleur's wand at the hedge. The vines that had erupted snaked toward Fleur and wrapped around her body. Before she could protest, they hauled her off the spider's back. "Ah!" Fleur cried as the vines yanked her through the air. There was a dull thud as they slammed her against the hedge, and the vines tightened, binding her from shoulders to ankles. She was pinned fast, unable to move. Lynn climbed down from the acromantula and stared at her, chest heaving. His heart pounded like a trapped animal. That whisper of Imperio had come far too close. If he'd been only half a second slower, he might have been under that curse himself. He stooped and leaned close to Fleur, searching her for any scent of polyjuice potion. There was none. The faint personal fragrance on her, herself, was still there. He stepped back, thinking hard. It looked as if Fleur was being controlled by Imperio. He couldn't tell whether the curse had been placed before the tournament began or during the match. If before, then a champion had been wandering the maze under Imperio for ages without anyone noticing. Beauxbaton's professors, the judges, even Dumbledore. If during, then it meant someone was still in the maze, able to slip an unforgivable curse onto a competitor without being detected. Lynn glanced up into the dark passage they'd come through. The hedgerow swallowed the light. Nothing could be seen. Chapter 295. Towards the Dark Wizard. Onward. While Lynn hesitated over whether to use his miraculous medical skills on Fleur, fast, panicked footsteps skittered through the maze. Two people, maybe more, were rushing toward him. Before they appeared, spells arrived. Avada Kedavra! A green beam slashed out of the darkness, aimed straight for Lynn's face. Reducto! A red bolt streaked in at a tricky angle, cutting off his retreat. Lynn rolled violently to the side. The killing curse whistled past his ear and detonated in the hedge behind him, instantly withering and blackening the branches. At the same time, he flicked his wand upward. A stone wall erupted from the ground, blocking the front. The reducto slammed into it with a bang. The new wall disintegrated into powder, rubble scattering everywhere. Lynn used the split second to get to his feet. Two figures stepped out of the dark side by side, Ryan and Cedric. Cedric spoke first, voice flat and empty. "Lynn, don't resist. Come with us quietly." Ryan, standing beside him, added in a threatening tone, "Don't be ungrateful." Lynn's nose twitched as he studied their faces. No scent of polyjuice, no sign of disguise. It was really them. He realized at once, they were under Imperio. There might be more controlled people nearby. He didn't hesitate. If they were being used as weapons, he'd treat them as such. He fixed his gaze on Ryan, the stronger of the two, and silently activated a trick he called stagnant gaze. Just as Ryan moved, his limbs felt leaden, his reactions dragged. He frowned, starting to understand, when Lynn's wand already rose. A powerful jet of water shot from the tip, thick and fierce, cleaving a trench wherever it passed. Ryan tried to dodge, but his body wouldn't obey. He fumbled his wand up and cast a shield charm. The water slammed against it with a dull roar. The force shoved him backward. His feet scraped and carved two long furrows in the turf. The shield charm flickered on the verge of shattering. Cedric reacted faster. He slipped aside, raised his wand, and prepared a transfiguration attack aimed at Lynn. Before he could finish, a foul gust hit his face. The acromantula lunged, fangs bared, claws ready. A spray of venomous saliva shot toward him. Cedric flinched. The saliva grazed his shoulder and hit the ground, immediately eating a smoking hole. The acromantula's reasoning was simple and brutally pragmatic. Help Lynn. Lynn wins. It lives. Refuse. If Lynn loses, would these two let it go? Impossible. It sided without hesitation. Lynn let the lightning he had just begun to condense in his hand dissipate. "Don't kill them," he called to the spider. "I need them alive." Then he turned up the pressure on the water jet. Splash! Ryan's shield charm finally burst with a crack. The water hit him full on, knocking him down and tumbling him across the ground. He came up sodden and miserable, barely keeping his composure, but he still fought. Defindo! A red beam shot from where Ryan lay. Lynn barely turned. He flicked a shield charm into place and deflected it. The stray beam arced, and by misfortune, or fate, it struck Cedric. Cedric was busy dodging the acromantula and didn't see it coming until it was too late. He had been about to cast a fire-making spell and was forced instead to throw up a shield. Sparks flew when the spell collided with it. He steadied himself, and then, Expelliarmus! A red flash nailed his wrist. Cedric's wand sailed out of his hand, spun once, and landed squarely in Lynn's grip. Both Ryan and Cedric froze in stunned disbelief. Lynn didn't give them time to think. He waved the wand again. The earth beneath Ryan liquefied into thick, sucking mud. The ground seemed to come alive, churning into a quagmire. Ryan sank. Ankles, calves, thighs. No amount of struggling freed him. Cleverly, Lynn plastered mud over his mouth to keep any more shouting from getting out. The earth closed up, leaving only Ryan's head exposed, plastered in muck, eyes bulging with anger, frustration, and disbelief. He turned to Cedric. The acromantula still harried him, but without his wand, Cedric could only dodge, retreating under the spider's relentless advance. Lynn watched, shook his head at the spider's uselessness in a fight. Fast runner, poor fighter, but good at knowing when to switch sides. Useless, he muttered. He raised his wand and flicked. Petrificus totalis. Caught off guard while dodging, Cedric froze mid-step, posture locked, a statue of himself. The acromantula paused, leaned in to sniff, then looked at Lynn as if to claim credit. Lynn ignored it. He stood and took in the scene. Ryan buried in mud, Cedric petrified, Fleur lashed to the wall by vines. 3 people, 3 champions under Imperio, converging at the same time to try to take him away. It was no accident. Lynn's face darkened. A dark wizard had infiltrated the maze. He drew 3 signal rockets from his robe and pointed them skyward. Whoosh! Bang! 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 3 red flares shot into the night and burst into brilliant fireworks. At the commentary booth, Ludo Bagman, half asleep, sat bolt upright. The explosions jolted the sleeping crowd awake. Bleary-eyed spectators rubbed their faces and stared at the giant screen and froze. The screen had been split into 6 feeds. 3 were blank. Their champions were already out. In Lynn's feed, he stood on a ruined path. Behind him, Fleur was tied to the wall by vines. Cedric was petrified. Nearby, only a head protruded from the earth, Ryan. At Lynn's feet crouched a giant acromantula. Confusion ran through the stands. What happened? Who are those people with Lynn? Is that Cedric? Why is only Ryan's head left? Why is Fleur tied to the wall? Whispers rippled like a tide. Ludo scrambled to his communicator, panic seeping into his voice. "Mr. Lynn, what happened? Why are there so many champions with you?" Lynn answered on screen, calm and direct. "They've been hit by the Imperio curse. They need to be taken to a hospital immediately." Bagman felt as if he'd been struck. Imperio, during the tournament? He blinked, then snapped into action, summoning the judges. The judges gathered, faces changing as Lynn's images played out. Professor McGonagall's was the most grave. Her lips were thin, her brow knit tightly as she watched the familiar faces. "Mr. Bagman," she said quietly, "I recommend we suspend the event and reschedule it." Bagman shook his head, worried. "Professor, the Goblet of Fire's contract isn't something you can just change. Once the event has started, it can't be interrupted. A final winner must be determined." Frown deepened. The other judges exchanged looks. After hurried discussion, The only course they could agree on was to evacuate the audience immediately, wait for the distress rockets to be fired, and then send rescue teams into the maze. As for the tournament itself, there was no precedent to halt it. It would continue. Back in the maze, waiting for word, Lynn felt a tightening unease, like finding mouse droppings and not the mouse itself. He was on edge. The communicator beside him buzzed again. Ludo's voice sounded sterner. "Mr. Lynn, you can withdraw from the Triwizard tournament now. Staff will escort you out with the 3 affected champions." He hesitated, then added, "You can also continue, but it will be dangerous." Lynn's answer was instant. "I'll continue." Harry, in a deep, dark passage, listened to the same offer. He stared into the black ahead. The cup was close. He didn't want to give up. After a beat, he said, "I'll continue." Katya heard it too. He hadn't even absorbed the warning. Only the opportunity mattered. "Continue," he said crisply. Fewer champions meant a better chance. Soon, Professor Flitwick arrived at Lynn's location with a small team of aurors and medical staff. The tiny professor hurried to Fleur, checked her, moved to the petrified Cedric, then knelt by Ryan's exposed head. Ryan made muffled sounds. Flitwick's face went soft with sympathy. "We'll get you out right away." He stood and faced Lynn, expression unusually solemn. "Lynn," he said, "you must be careful. That dark wizard, he could still be nearby." Lynn nodded. "I know." Flitwick hesitated, then patted Lynn's leg. He couldn't reach his shoulder, and said simply, "Be extremely careful." "I will," Lynn promised. The aurors and medics took the 3 affected champions away. The maze fell quiet again. Lynn turned to the acromantula, which had been waiting loyally by his side. "Let's go," he said. The acromantula rose and crouched in readiness. Lynn swung himself up and patted its head. "Towards the dark wizard. Forward." The spider's 8 legs struck out, carrying them deeper into the darkness. Chapter 296. The Quidditch pitch lay empty. The spectators had been evacuated back to the castle's great hall under the protection of the Hogwarts professors, much to their chagrin. They had waited until the final moment, only to be driven away before they could see who would win. Even so, faced with the professors' stern expressions, they had returned reluctantly. The stands were deserted, the only sound the wind whispering through the seats. On the judges' panel, several heads were bent over the 3 remaining screens on the large display. Lynn's, Harry's, and Katya's. 3 points of light moved through the maze. No one could guess what might happen next. Professor McGonagall clenched the small communication device in her hand until her knuckles went white. She had called Dumbledore no fewer than 10 times. No one had answered. Fudge had reported an emergency at Privet Drive, saying Dumbledore had rushed there, but when he might return, no one knew. McGonagall forced herself to breathe slowly. All they could do now was wait. At least Lynn had sent out a signal for help. Nothing else had happened to the champions. Ludo Bagman let out a huge, shaky sigh and wiped the sweat from his forehead, hoping the dark wizard had been driven off. Deep inside the maze, Lynn rode the acromantula, its 8 legs thudding softly against the earth. After a turn, he saw a figure blocking the path ahead. Katya Volok, standing in the middle of the lane, wand gripped tightly, eyes narrowed with vigilance. When Katya recognized him, his pupils went flat with shock. His wand snapped upward, and a jinx shot toward Lynn. Lynn dove aside. The jinx missed, striking the hedge. He frowned. Katya attacking? That meant, Lynn reasoned, Katya must already be under the Imperious curse. Whoever had seen the first 2 tasks would not, by choice, raise a hand against him. If Katya were acting of his own free will, he wouldn't dare. With that decided, Lynn didn't bother with finesse. He raised his wand and let loose a bolt of lightning. Blue-white light cut through the darkness toward Katya. Katya's eyes widened. He threw up a shield charm, but in his haste it was thin as paper. The lightning struck, the flimsy barrier shattered, and the residual current hit him squarely. A scream tore from Katya. Smoke hissed from his hair as his body convulsed and he toppled backward, gasping. Lynn didn't give him a chance to plead. He moved forward, fists already clenching. Fine hairs sprouted across his knuckles, oozing a colorless neurotoxin invisible in the dark. He struck. Bang! Katya's face snapped sideways as venom seeped through his pores. He screamed. Lynn's second blow landed. Bang! "I didn't want it to come to this, old cat," Lynn said, hammering the words out between strikes. "But you're sick. You need treatment." He kept hitting, punch, slap, crack, each blow ramming into flesh. Katya's cries reverberated down the narrow passage, growing more desperate and shrill. His face swelled grotesquely, eyes slitted, lips blown up, features nearly unrecognizable. "Stop! Hand," he mumbled through the swelling. "I'm no thick." His words were slurred but earnest. He shook his head vehemently. I'm not controlled." Lynn stopped and looked at him. Katya's swollen, pig-like face was wet with sincerity. No resistance, no attack, only pleading. Hope flared in Lynn. The treatment had worked. He nodded, but to be safe decided to remove the root of the problem. He clenched his fist again. Katya's eyes widened. "No!" Lynn's fist smashed down. A sudden flash lit the shadows behind him. Peter's jolt gave a frantic warning in his head, and Lynn flipped aside. A streak of green shot past where he'd just been, flying just inches from Katya's face. It was the killing curse. Katya stood frozen, his mind gone blank. His body had betrayed him in other ways too. Lynn had no time for pity. He sprang to his feet, pointed his wand into the darkness, and blasted an explosion charm. Flame and light erupted, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows. Lynn narrowed his eyes. Arthur Wendell. On the judges' panel, Ludo and the principals stared, stunned. "To have the champion from Azkaban remember my name," Arthur said with the bland calm of someone commenting on the weather, "is a great honor." Lynn had no patience for pleasantries. He levitated a chunk of rubble with reducto intent when Arthur, surprised, slammed a rock up as a shield. It exploded into fragments that showered the passage. Arthur stumbled back, steadying himself. "You don't have anything you care to ask?" Arthur said, trying to stall. Lightning already crackled on the tip of Lynn's wand. "I do," Lynn said, "but that can wait until after I've given you a good thrashing." He sent a bolt, a thicker, darker lightning than before. The blue-white light shot through with an eerie red that twisted the air. Arthur's face changed. Only a fool would stand against that head-on. He dove aside and barely escaped. The bolt smashed into a hedge and set it alight. Avada Kedavra! Arthur's counterattack was swift. A green light stabbed toward Lynn's head. Lynn tilted his body. The killing curse shaved past his cheek. Arthur's wand flurried. Spells rained out. Killing curses, cruciatus curses, corrosion jinxes, severing charms. An onslaught of dark arts launched without mercy. Lynn dodged and weaved, raising his wand to parry or tilting his body to slip past lethal beams. His Peter's jolt worked overtime, predicting trajectories, keeping him one step ahead. Arthur's attacks grew denser, more frenzied, but they missed. "Is that all you've got?" Lynn taunted. Arthur didn't answer, only allowed the barest curl of lip as if to say otherwise. Lynn's instincts told him Arthur was stalling. Cold resolve tightened in him. He wouldn't just dodge anymore. He thrust his wand out and unleashed fiendfire. The fire coalesced into a monstrous dragon that lunged at Arthur. Arthur slapped up a shield charm, and the fiery beast crashed into it, flames scattering. The impact shoved Arthur back. His shield shimmered and cracked. Arthur gritted his teeth, but very suddenly the ground split and a wall of earth shot up, cutting off the fiendfire. Lynn leveled a look. "That it?" Arthur coughed, pale and ragged, but with that same eerie smile. "You won't last much longer," Lynn said. Arthur nodded, grim. "I know." He hesitated, then added in a whisper almost to himself, "But perhaps I don't need to last much longer." Lynn didn't know what scheme Arthur had in mind, and he didn't care. He raised his wand higher than before. The light at its tip intensified into a furious white blue. For the first time, the smile at the corners of Arthur's mouth froze. Before Arthur could finish whatever he was about to say, Lynn struck. Fiendfire laced with raw lightning poured from the wand point, golden red flames surging like a sea. Arthur's shield held for less than a breath before shattering. The flames swallowed him. A scream, high and brief, cut through the inferno. Then it was over. The fire died down, leaving only a small pile of ash drifting in the night air. Lynn stared until he was certain Arthur was gone. He breathed out, sheathed his wand, and mounted the acromantula. "Go," he said. The giant spider leapt forward, 8 legs eating up the maze. Lynn watched the hedges fly past with complicated feelings. He wanted the final task to be done. If he wasn't fighting, he was rushing into fight after fight. Fleur, Cedric and Ryan, Katya, then Arthur. It had been one confrontation after another. Now it should settle, right? "Faster," he urged the acromantula, and it accelerated. They passed fork after fork until light finally broke the maze's gloom. A warm, bright glow pulsed ahead, the cup. Lynn's heart leapt. He urged the acromantula on. The stone plinth grew closer. The cup sat atop it, blue-white flames licking its form and shining bright in the dark. And then Lynn's gaze froze. A figure burst from a side passage in another direction and surged straight for the plinth. Lynn recognized the movement instantly. Harry shot to the front, snatched the cup, and in the next second both boy and trophy vanished into the maze, leaving only a faint light that slowly dissolved. Lynn sat motionless on the acromantula, staring at the empty plinth, his mind blank. On the judges' panel, a crack of firelight announced Dumbledore's arrival. He stood there, robes dusty, his beard flecked with grime and exhaustion etched on his face, but his eyes went instantly to the screen. He saw Harry disappear. He saw the last of the light fading from the plinth. McGonagall sprang up. "Albus, Harry." Dumbledore raised a hand to still her, his gaze fixed on the image. Complex emotion flickered behind his spectacles. After a long, measured silence, he spoke softly. "Harry has been apparated away." He let the words hang, then added in a quieter voice, "with the cup." Chapter 297. Dumbledore, send me your location. I'll be there right away. Ah! Clutching the trophy, Harry screamed as he hit a clearing. The fall came so suddenly he didn't even have time to brace himself. He slumped down hard, landing on his backside. Pain flared so sharply it nearly brought tears to his eyes. The trophy flew from his hands and clattered across the ground, spinning until it came to rest a short distance away. Harry hunched over, clutching his sore behind and lifting his head to take in his surroundings. Where was he? Shadows pooled between massive stone pillars that rose up around him. The air was damp and musty, charged with a strange, oppressive sense of wrongness. Something in the place felt eerily familiar, too familiar. The chairs scattered about were dilapidated, crooked, as if no one had sat in them for years. If a dozen black-robed figures stood below, it would be exactly like one of his nightmares. And the cauldron, absurdly large, wide enough to hold a person. The memory snapped into place. No. Harry's pupils contracted. This was the place from his dream. He spun to run, but before he could take a step, the sound of footsteps echoed from all directions, drawing nearer. Instinctively, he dove behind one of the pillars to hide. Then his scar flared. Pain stabbed through his skull without warning. His legs went weak, and he stumbled, collapsing to the ground. The fall exposed him. The footsteps hastened. A moment later, several hooded figures in black robes stepped out from behind the pillars. Their faces were hidden by hoods, but the aura about them was cold and dangerous. The leader stopped, looking down at Harry sprawled on the stone, and let out a raspy, eerie laugh. "Harry Potter!" He dragged the name out. "Are you ready to sacrifice yourself for the Dark Lord?" Harry gritted his teeth and reached for his wand, fighting the agony searing through his forehead, but a flash of red light shot toward him. Expelliarmus! The disarming charm hit true. Harry's wand tumbled from his fingers and skidded into the hands of one of the followers. It was over. Harry's heart lurched into his stomach. He scrambled, but the black-robed figures were already closing in. One of them flicked a wand. An invisible force lifted him and slammed him against a pillar. Ropes flew from the wand tip and coiled around him, binding him tight. He was immobile, forced to watch helplessly like an incompetent. "Do it, quickly," a rasped voice urged. Harry noticed then that one of the figures was cradling something in his arms. It wasn't a baby. The thing's skin was a sickly dark red, as if flayed. It was hairless, its face without a nose, only two thin slits, and lips so thin they were almost invisible. The memory of the thing on the back of Professor Quirrell's head in his first year surged through Harry's mind. Lord Voldemort. The hooded man carried the thing to the giant cauldron with the care given a fragile treasure and lowered it inside. A roar of flame erupted beneath the pot. The liquid inside boiled and sent up ghostly plumes of steam. Harry stared at the churning surface and, helpless, found himself silently praying. "Scald it to death. Scald it to death. Scald it to death, please." But the thing in the boiling cauldron made no sound. One of the black-robed men drew back his hood, revealing a gaunt, pale face, sunken eyes, and a cold smirk. He waved his wand. A bone beside the cauldron lifted, floated, and fell into the brew. He murmured an incantation under his breath. "Bone of the Father, unknowingly given, you shall renew your son." Another man stepped forward. He raised his wand and aimed a cutting curse at his own left hand. The spell struck. Blood sprayed. His hand was severed at the wrist and fell with a sickening thud. He gritted his teeth without a sound, stooped to pick up the severed hand, and tossed it into the cauldron. Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you shall revive your master. All eyes turned to Harry, who was bound to the pillar. Their gazes were fanatical, impatient. Harry's stomach dropped. The man who just mutilated himself produced a small knife and approached. The blade glinted. Harry struggled, but the ropes held fast. The man seized his wrist and sliced it open. Blood welled and spilled. He held Harry's bleeding arm over the cauldron and let the blood drip in. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you shall resurrect your foe. The chant finished. The cauldron trembled violently. Then, bang, it exploded. Boiling liquid exploded outward, knocking the acolytes to the ground. Harry, tied to the pillar, couldn't dodge. He could only watch the scalding tide surge toward him. And then the liquid stopped less than a meter away. As if steered by some invisible force, it rose against gravity, gathering and condensing in midair. Wisps of black mist seeped through the cracks in the stone and swirled into the floating mass, forming a transparent cocoon. Inside, something indistinct writhed and took shape. Pain like a hammer blow slammed through Harry's scar worse than ever before. He screamed. The cocoon burst. A figure stepped out. He was deathly white, skin stretched tight over bone, bald, with blood-red eyes and vertical slits for pupils, cold, devoid of warmth. His lips were absent, showing 2 rows of uneven teeth. His hands were long and spider-like. His nose reduced to 2 thin slits, no different than an outlet. Lord Voldemort looked down at his hands, then up at Harry. Something like recognition or amusement flickered in his blood-red eyes. And then he smiled. The smile was unnaturally wide, his pale flesh peeling back to reveal his teeth. Harry Potter, his voice rasped, metallic and cold. We meet again. At the same moment, far away at Hogwarts, Snape and Karkaroff both felt a disturbance prick at the skin of their wrists. Elsewhere in the country, the same prick flared. Inside Malfoy Manor, Lucius Malfoy lay asleep until a burning pain flashed through his wrist, jolting him upright so suddenly he felt as if struck by lightning. He looked down and saw the dark mark, once faint, now pitch black and vivid. The Dark Lord had been fully resurrected. He was summoning his followers. Lucius's heart lurched. For a long, frozen second, his mind emptied. Then he forced himself to move. He needed to contact his business partner. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed. Ring, ring, ring. The call was answered after a few seconds. Hello, came a blunt, impatient voice. Lynn, he guessed, furious after watching Harry snatch a championship. You'd better have an important business matter, the voice said. Lucius swallowed the greeting he'd been about to blurt out and plunged in. Mr. Lynn, an event that affects our business has occurred. His voice was low and strained. I can feel it. You know who has been resurrected. He's summoning us to return to his side. There was a second of silence, then a burst of exasperated noise. Don't pull my beard, one voice complained. Don't choke me. What time do you think it is? You're still in the mood to argue? Stop it at once. There was the sound of shuffling, and then a different voice came on the line. Hello, this is Dumbledore. Lucius froze completely. His hand went slack around the phone. A long pause stretched on. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, he managed one word. Okay. Chapter 298. Voldemort. Dumbledore. You're getting old. Ding dong. Lynn's phone chimed. Lucius Malfoy's location popped up on the screen. He leaned in to look, but Dumbledore moved with surprising speed. Not at all like a man over 100 years old. The old wizard only glanced at Lynn's phone before tucking it into his own robe pocket. Albus? Professor McGonagall called. Dumbledore didn't answer. He spared Lynn a brief, apologetic look. Something Lynn didn't even notice. A flash of fire flamed out, and Fawkes rose, carrying Dumbledore away from Hogwarts. Lynn stood frozen, staring at the empty air where Dumbledore had been, mouth open. It was fine if the old man left, but he'd taken my phone too? Reflexively, Lynn reached for his phone, about to summon Wuon to give chase. Before he could, a firm hand closed on his wrist, McGonagall's grip, iron strong, not allowing him to pull away. You need to rest now, Mr. Lynn, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. He sighed and let her lead him back toward the castle. The phone? Dumbledore would return it. Probably. Meanwhile, at the Riddle graveyard, a cold wind rustled dead leaves. Cloud cover swallowed most of the moon, and broken stone pillars cast heavy shadows. Harry, bound to a statue, gulped for air. His wrists bled, but the pain from the scar on his forehead was worse, wave after wave of agony that blurred thought. Still, he forced himself to keep his eyes open and watch what unfolded. "We meet again," Voldemort said. Harry said nothing. He stared at the Dark Lord, teeth clenched, enduring the agony. Voldemort ignored his silence, turning to the Death Eaters slithering at his feet. "Rise, my servants." They lifted their heads and howled back fanatically. "Welcome back, Master. Long live the Dark Lord." Voldemort raised his hand for silence, then looked down at Harry. "Now," he drawled, "let us see whether that legendary boy can truly save himself." He stepped forward, the Death Eaters parting like water. What followed was, for the most part, a verification, an exchange of words and wills between Lord Voldemort and the boy marked by destiny. Harry was bound, bleeding, shaking with pain, but his tongue was stubborn. For every barb Voldemort hurled, Harry offered 10 retorts. Voldemort bristled. "Very well," he said at last. "Since you are so eager to show off, I'll grant you a chance." He flicked his wand. The ropes holding Harry split apart. Harry hit the ground, pain racking him, then made himself crawl to his feet. Voldemort took a step back. "Bow to me, Harry," he mocked. "At least observe the etiquette of a duel. Dumbledore would insist you show some grace before you die." The Death Eaters laughed, eager and cruel. Harry said nothing. "I said." Voldemort snapped, the smile gone. "Bow." He pressed his wand down. An invisible force crushed Harry's spine, forcing his body into a perfect bow. Laughter swelled among the Death Eaters. Voldemort nodded in satisfaction. "Now let us formally begin." He raised his wand. "Cruciatus!" A scarlet beam streaked out. Harry couldn't avoid it. The curse struck him, and his body convulsed with a scream that pierced the graveyard. He curled in on himself, shaking, while the Death Eaters howled with delight. "Get up, Harry!" Voldemort shouted. "Just like your father." Harry forced himself to rise, legs trembling, face drained of color. He managed to utter, "Expi!" Another Cruciatus cut him off. Again he fell, screamed, rolled into himself. Each time he climbed to his feet, Voldemort struck him down anew. The Death Eaters' laughter ebbed as the skull-crushing repetition wore on. Eventually, Voldemort grew bored. He watched Harry pull himself up once more, a cruel smile forming. "How tenacious," he mocked. "He still insists on dueling me." Harry gasped and trembled, but his gaze never wavered. Voldemort raised his wand again, then, after a beat, said with a tone almost contemplative, "Let him rest a little. He must be in great pain." Then, Avada Kedavra! A jet of green light lashed from his wand. At the same instant, Harry fired his own spell, Expelliarmus! The green and red lights struck in midair with a violent crack and a blinding flash. The Death Eaters froze, mouths open. How could this child possibly block a killing curse with Expelliarmus? The two beams began to writhe against one another, a high, grating sound filling the air. Then, without warning, both colors vanished and a brilliant golden light flared up, enveloping the two combatants. From Harry's wand, illusory figures began to pour out, translucent, softly luminous, uncanny in the dark. The first was a middle-aged man with messy hair and round glasses, smiling gently. The second was a young woman with long red hair and green eyes, both beautiful and tender. More followed, one after another, faces from memories and love, drifting out and looking down. "Harry, you've done well," one of the apparitions said. "Hold on, dear," said another. Harry's eyes flooded. The apparitions knew time was short. They turned toward Voldemort and surged forward. He was momentarily entangled, held back by the onslaught of memory. Harry gritted his teeth and lunged for the portkey that had been prepared. His legs shook and his body screamed, but he ran, closing the distance. The portkey was within reach. He was about to grab it. Voldemort broke free and whipped his wand toward Harry's back. Avada! A roar of fire suddenly exploded at the edge of the graveyard, and a figure stepped through the flames with a single ringing word. "Tom!" Voldemort's killing curse went wide, over Harry's head and into a distant tombstone, which shattered in a spray of stone. Harry had already clutched the portkey. The world spun, and he was gone. Left in the graveyard were Voldemort, Dumbledore, and a crowd of stunned Death Eaters. Voldemort stared at Dumbledore, eyes red with rage. He launched a green jet at the old man, without hesitation. Dumbledore moved, just a fraction, leaned aside. The curse grazed his robes and blew a statue behind him to pieces. His wand was already up. He lashed a spell at Voldemort's face. Voldemort sneered and slashed up a black shield. The spell hit and fizzled, harmless. For a long moment, the graveyard was a maelstrom of spells, green and red lights crossing, clashing. Yet both men seemed oddly at ease. Dumbledore's movements were deliberate, calm, each countermeasure measured. Voldemort, too, maintained a composed, even faintly sardonic manner. Around them, the Death Eaters crouched in the shadows, terrified to act. One stray curse could shift the balance and incur the Dark Lord's fury. As they traded spells, Voldemort's voice, cold and rasping, cut through the turmoil. "Dumbledore," he said while casting, "you've grown old." A green bolt flew. Dumbledore stepped aside and sent one back. Voldemort continued, voice mocking, "You've lost your edge. How many more years can you protect Potter?" Translated, "Dumbledore, you're washed up. Why didn't you kill me sooner? And this Potter you've picked, it seems a poor choice." Dumbledore smiled, a gentle, composed smile, even kind, and answered slowly, wand slicing the air. "These old bones of mine," he said, "can still shine for the wizarding world for a long time yet." Voldemort blocked the reply, brow tightening. Dumbledore went on, unhurried. "The new generation of duelists." He flicked his wand, sending 3 spells almost together. "There will surely be someone to take my place." Voldemort stepped back defensively, the corner of his mouth darkening. Dumbledore finished, "And continue to protect the wizarding world." Meaning, it's not that I can't defeat you now, it's that I cannot eliminate what I stand for. Let my students grow, and we'll see whether you endure. Voldemort's face fell. The two fell silent, spells still crackling between them. Time stretched, neither would yield. The Death Eaters watched, frozen. Then the graveyard flared again, golden red fire lighting everything brighter than before. Both men paused, turning toward the blaze. A cloaked figure stepped out. The hood sat low, hiding most of the face. Only a chin and tightly pressed lips were visible. In his hand he held a wand, and he used fiendfire to clear a path without a word. "Tom," he called again, voice resonant over stone and ash. Chapter 299, Then You're Not So Lucky. Lord Voldemort froze for a heartbeat at the sudden intruder. He and Dumbledore had been locked in a stalemate, spells ricocheting between them with neither gaining ground. Then someone barreled in without a word and hurled fiendfire. The fire warped into a colossal dragon that roared and lunged toward them. Wherever it passed, everything burned. Tombstones shattered, rubble turned to powder. Weeds were incinerated down to nothing. Ancient stone pillars collapsed, swallowed by flame, reduced to slag in an instant. Voldemort stared at the hooded figure, surprise and suspicion flashing in his red eyes. The way the newcomer controlled fiendfire was beyond most wizards he had ever seen. Cold, effortless, like hefting a feather. Clearly, they were holding back. Voldemort decided on the spot to deal with this new threat first. He broke off his duel with Dumbledore. His body burst into a cloud of black mist and vanished into the night. Dumbledore's spell missed and hit a tombstone behind him, shattering it. Moments later, Voldemort reappeared dozens of meters away, wand raised, a cold sneer on his face. With a flick of his wand, a pitch-black fiendfire dragon erupted from its tip, viler and more violent than the other, its body burning with inky flames. The two dragons collided above the graveyard with a thunderous roar. Flames and sparks rained down. The fiendfire masses bit and tore at one another, each trying to consume the other. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. He watched the hooded figure calmly sustaining flame after flame from his wand tip. Intriguing. With a flick of his wrist, Voldemort split his dragon, 1 into 2, 2 into 4. 4 pitch-black dragons swarmed toward the hooded figure from different directions. The intruder remained composed and split his gold-red dragon into 4 as well. 8 dragons writhed and fought in the sky, a chaotic inferno that lit the whole graveyard. A sneer tugged at Voldemort's lips. He cast again, and the dragons shifted tactics. Instead of simply clashing, they coiled around one another, spinning into a massive vortex of fire. The vortex sucked outward, as if it meant to draw the hooded figure in along with all his dragons. The hooded figure's gaze sharpened. He thrust his wand downward and planted himself perfectly still. The dragons steadied, refusing to yield even as the vortex tore at them. For a long beat, the two men faced one another across the roaring fire funnel, neither relenting. Voldemort felt his advantage slipping. He had planned to dispatch this presumptuous newcomer in 2 or 3 moves. He had not expected a stalemate. And Dumbledore was nearby, watching, waiting for some opportune moment. The Dark Lord ground his teeth. The situation had turned against him. He broke the deadlock with a sudden strike. "Cruciatus!" he hissed. A crimson light shot from his wand. The hooded figure flickered and slipped aside with ease. Voldemort jabbed his wand again and again. 3 spells launched almost at once, cutting off escape routes. The figure did not run. He stepped forward and swept his wand. A wall of water rose from the ground and slammed into the incoming spells, scattering them into mist. Voldemort snorted. This was exactly as he had hoped, until the mist spread. He dissolved into black vapor and reappeared behind the hooded figure, wand aimed at his back, green light already sizzling. As if sensing eyes at the back of his head, the figure whipped his wand around. Torrential impact! A violent jet of water burst from the wand and struck Voldemort full in the face. He spasmed upward, narrowly avoiding the blast. At the same moment, a blinding blue-white light exploded overhead. A bolt of lightning, thick as a barrel, hurtled down from the sky. Voldemort had no time to think. He dissolved into mist again. The lightning slammed into empty air and smashed a crater into the ground. Voldemort reformed dozens of meters away, shaking, sparks still dancing around the hooded man's wand tip. "Lightning," Voldemort murmured. He had never seen a wizard wield lightning so casually. He forced himself to focus and lifted his wand. The ground trembled as countless fissures spidered outward from his feet. Thick black mist surged from the cracks and solidified into enormous hands reaching up to seize the hooded figure. The newcomer reacted with a single spell. Protego Diabolica. A ring of fierce flame erupted around him, forming a blazing barrier. The black mist hands grabbed and sizzled away against the fire, but they came in endless waves. Slowly, the light of the barrier dimmed. Voldemort allowed a cold smile. He had expected this to overwhelm the intruder. Then a spell struck from the side. He barely managed to dodge and was forced to attend to the new threat. Dumbledore's spells rained in torrents, each one demanding attention. Sweat beaded on Voldemort's forehead. This couldn't continue. He plunged his power into the earth and brought it up in a single devastating blast. A ring of black shockwaves radiated outward, shattering ground and pulverizing tombstones. Dumbledore's spell scattered, and the hooded figure's fiery shield trembled violently. But it didn't break. Voldemort's frown deepened. This defense was tougher than he had guessed. He met the hooded man's eyes and felt something uncanny. His thoughts were clear, but his body lagged, each reaction half a beat slow, as if moving through thick mud. He realized at once, some sort of magic was restraining him. He gritted his teeth and piled force upon force, trying to shove his power through the invisible drag. It was at that moment another spell came from the side. His body was late to respond. Bang! The curse grazed his shoulder. The aftershock tore flesh, blood welled and leaked. Voldemort groaned, his pale face even more deathly. He glared at the hooded figure. The newcomer stepped forward. The fiery shield collapsed. Crackling sparks of electricity skittered over his body as he walked straight toward Voldemort, wand leveled. "Partis temporis," he said softly. For an instant, the world seemed to shift. Gold-red flames erupted from the wand tip, and in a blink, a colossal fiend-fire dragon filled the night sky, 10 times larger than the first. Its wingspan stretched dozens of meters, its body alight with blue-white electric fire. It roared and dove. Voldemort staggered back, frantically summoning black shields to protect himself. The dragon slammed into them with an earth-shattering explosion. The shields shattered. The dragon burned out and dissolved into a spray of sparks, but the shockwave hurled Voldemort dozens of meters. He hit the ground hard, robes torn and singed, gasping. The hooded figure stood not far away, wand still trained at him. Voldemort forced himself upright and stared at the face hidden in shadow. "I will remember you," he promised through clenched teeth. Then he detonated again. Black mist poured from his body in a frantic, spreading tide, blanketing the entire graveyard. The intruder stabbed a bolt of lightning into the mist. Dumbledore flung spell after spell into it too. Several screams echoed from within, Death Eaters who had not fled in time. Then, as suddenly as he had come, Voldemort and the mist vanished. Where they had been, only the night wind howled. Dumbledore lowered his wand and shook his head. He stepped forward as Lynn made to pursue, but he caught him by the arm. "Lynn, do not chase him." Lynn halted in mid-leap. He pulled back his hood, sweat beading on his brow and battle fury still flaring in his eyes. "Headmaster, I can still fight," he protested. "We should chase him. He's just been resurrected. His body will be unstable. We could finish him now and rid the wizarding world of a great evil." Dumbledore was silent for a moment and then shook his head. "I can fight as well, but no one knows how many Horcruxes Tom has left." Lynn froze. "He is Tom?" Dumbledore nodded. "Killing him now would only drive him to hide again." Lynn slumped. "Fine. Then let him live a little longer." He begrudgingly pocketed his wand, clearly dissatisfied, but Dumbledore's reasoning was sound. Leave him alive, and you risk later suffering, but hunt him now and risk an incomplete victory against a fragment of a man who could return. Dumbledore's expression brightened suddenly with a small curiosity. "By the way, when did you get a phoenix as a partner?" Lynn blinked. Dumbledore's gaze was fixed on the edge of the graveyard where Fawkes perched on a tombstone, preening calmly. "In first year," Lynn said. Dumbledore's mouth fell open. "First year?" "Yeah," Lynn said. "I was already middle-aged when I met Fawkes." Lynn looked at him and then, with a teasing tilt of the head, added, "Oh, then your luck isn't very good." Dumbledore said nothing in response. Chapter 300, Voldemort has returned. The award ceremony for the 6-7 Wizard Tournament was as grand as any could imagine. Whatever anyone called it, the names spat out by the Goblet of Fire meant champion, and the Great Hall glittered under that promise. The 4 house tables had been pushed back against the walls and replaced by rows upon rows of gilded chairs, filled with guests from across the wizarding world. Reporters from almost every paper had gathered: the Daily Prophet, the Wizarding Weekly, the Magic Daily, the Witch's Voice, the Quibbler, along with correspondents from France, Germany, the United States, Brazil, and Africa, pointing quick quotes quills and cameras at the podium like an artillery line. Flashbulbs cracked and popped until people squinted. Cornelius Fudge stood in the center of the platform in a new pinstriped robe, that practiced smile on his face that always came out for the cameras. He cleared his throat. An enchanted loudspeaker carried his voice through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues from the international wizarding community." He let his gaze sweep over the crowd. After a year of intense competition, the first Triwizard Tournament has finally come to a successful conclusion. Applause rose. "Now, on behalf of the British Ministry of Magic, I have the honor to announce." He turned and took the Triwizard Cup, its blue-white flames licking harmlessly, from an attendant. "The champion of this tournament is..." He drew out the suspense. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Harry Potter." Thunderous applause greeted the name. Harry rose from his seat, his face beet red, and made his way to the podium with slightly stiff steps. His wrist was still bandaged from where a Death Eater had cut him, but he hardly seemed to notice. Fudge handed him the cup and produced a giant novelty check, along with a prize of 1,000 galleons. Harry accepted the check and froze, unsure whether to smile for the cameras or examine the cup. Flashbulbs continued to erupt in a blinding strobe. In the crowd, Edgar sat beside Lynn, clapping half-heartedly and sighing. "Who would have thought?" he muttered. He bulldozed through everything, felling beasts, facing down dark wizards, putting Durmstrang in a panic, and then got intercepted right at the end. William pushed up his glasses. "I didn't expect it either." Edgar shook his head, regret written across his face. Who told a dark wizard to sneak into the competition and pick a fight with Lynn? Bad luck, that's all. Ollie, terse as ever, added, "He's still alive." "That's true," Edgar said. "That dark wizard went out with no ash left to speak of." He looked from Harry posing with Fudge to Lynn, who stood off to the side with an unreadable expression. "That proves how dangerous Lynn is," Edgar whispered. "Taking down a dragon is one thing. Beating a dark wizard is another entirely." The applause died down after Harry and Fudge posed for photographs. Fudge motioned to the other champions. Come, all champions. Up here for a group photo." Fleur, Crumb, Ryan, Amina, Cedric, Roger all stepped onto the stage and lined up. Lynn was at the far end, face flat, showing nothing as cameras flashed again and again. After the photo, the champions began to file off the platform. Lynn had taken just one step. "Mr. Lynn, please wait." Fudge's voice called from behind. Lynn paused, turned to look at Fudge, and then at Dumbledore sitting at the judge's table. Dumbledore gave a small nod and the faintest of smiles, the sort that said something good was coming. Lynn raised an eyebrow and turned back. A whispering wave rolled through the hall. What does Fudge want with him? Is he going to reprimand him for the killing? They would have arrested him if they were going to. Fudge cleared his throat and addressed the assembly. "Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen," he launched into another speech. He praised the bravery and skill the champions had displayed, pointed out the extraordinary way one champion had gone beyond the call of duty to rescue trapped competitors, and then, slowly, deliberately, referred to the dark wizard who had infiltrated the maze and been slain. After the final resolution of the Wizengamot, Fudge intoned, voice climbing, "It has been decided to award Mr. Lynn," he paused for effect, "the Order of Merlin, first class." A beat of stunned silence, then the great hall erupted in thunderous applause. The noise rolled and swelled until the rafters seemed to tremble. Merlin's beard, how old is he? This is the highest honor in the wizarding world. He deserves it. Flashbulbs flared so harshly that Lynn squinted, unsure what to feel. Dumbledore rose from his chair, and with a flourish of his wand, the great hall transformed. The gold curtains became deep purple, embroidered with a large silver W. The house tablecloths matched, and the ceiling candles took on a solemn silver-white glow. Dumbledore's robes changed into the formal Wizengamot courtroom robes, deep purple with wide cuffs and a golden scale embroidered on the chest. He walked to the podium, each step measured, and pinned the glittering medal on Lynn's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "let us welcome the youngest ever recipient of the Order of Merlin, first class, in the history of the British wizarding world." The applause was even louder this time. Lynn let the sound wash over him and allowed the corner of his mouth to lift in a small, private satisfaction. Not bad, he thought. The investiture seemed to signal the end of the banquet, but Dumbledore remained on the podium, holding the empty box that had held the Order of Merlin. He looked as if he hesitated to speak. His gaze swept across the students, the staff, the international delegations, and finally landed on Cornelius Fudge at the judges' table. Fudge sat smugly, already picturing tomorrow's front pages, a smoothly run tournament, a victorious Harry Potter, and the ministry's role in honoring a hero. Tonight had been his. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "I am sorry to take up everyone's time," he said softly, but his voice carried to every corner. "But there is one matter." Fudge's posture changed. He sat up, eyes fixed on Dumbledore. "The Ministry of Magic," Dumbledore began. "Dumbledore!" Fudge burst out, trying to interrupt. "I said, Cornelius!" Dumbledore cut him off without looking his way. "Let me finish." Fudge's mouth opened and closed. He widened his eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came. A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. "What's wrong with Fudge? Did Dumbledore do that?" "I don't know." Dumbledore ignored them, drew a deep breath, and faced the assembly. "There is one thing," he said. "The Ministry of Magic would prefer I did not tell you." His gaze rested on the younger faces in particular. "But I believe that hiding the truth will only make things worse." The hall grew so silent one could hear a pin drop. Everyone held their breath. The main announcement was coming. Lord Voldemort has returned. His followers have begun to operate in the wizarding world once more. The dark wizard who died in the maze was one of them. The words hung in the air. For a moment there was stunned stillness, then the great hall exploded. Screams, gasps, the rattle of chairs, the clatter of breaking cups. Chaos. "You know who?" "Impossible. Isn't he dead? Dumbledore must be joking. You can't make light of that." At the Gryffindor table, a group of first-years huddled together in fear. Ravenclaws covered their mouths, some went pale. In Hufflepuff, Hannah clutched Ernie's arm so tightly her nails dug in. The Slytherin table, by contrast, was unnervingly silent. The pureblood students' faces were masks of conflicted thought. Flashbulbs still popped as reporters scrambled to record the moment. Dumbledore stood on the podium and waited until the cacophony subsided. Then, almost casually, he added, "Now, go back to your houses and rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." He stepped down from the platform and walked away. Reporters swarmed to the remaining champions. As Lynn moved to leave, a cloud of journalists descended on him. Mr. Lynn! Mr. Lynn, please wait. What do you make of Lord Voldemort's return? As the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin, first class, do you feel confident facing the Dark Lord? Lynn said nothing.